computer. So today is, what is today? Today is October 7th. It would be one day before my dad's birthday. That's when it would be. And we are going to talk about cognitive and perceptual difficulties. And actually, not cognitive perceptual. Why does it say cognitive perceptual disorder? Oh, because I never changed that. That's why. We're going to talk about neurological disorders today. I'm sure. Kelly, sure. I got to change that. It should be neurological disorders. That's wrong. But we're going to talk about neurological disorders. So we're going to pretend like that slide doesn't exist. So neurological disorders, some of the things we're going to talk about today. What I'm primarily hitting on today are what would be the gold standard disorders that are going to hit you on your boards. Oh, happy anniversary. Yay. Round of applause. Get it? Round of applause. No, I thought that was funny. But I think a lot of stuff is funny. That's the best part. All right. Yeah, it's been a year. That's kind of funky, huh? Well, more than a year when you think of how long it took you to get into the program, right? I mean, that's the downright truth. Good news is, if you think about it, that means you basically have a little, like, not even a year left. It will go by quicker. Don't worry. The next semester, especially, at least for me, is like a whirlwind nightmare because how short it is. Anyway, so guess Mr. here. So the couple we're going to cover are your gold standard diseases that you're going to encounter on your boards. So when we talk about neurological diseases you're going to encounter on your boards, a lot of times we'll talk about the gold standards. And like Huntington's and epilepsy are silver standards, but I threw them in there because I've been seeing a few more questions about them. And then you've got bronze standards. And bronze standards are some of those weird neurological disorders that maybe you might get a question on, but it's going to be really rare. These are the ones you're going to get questions on. I pretty much can guarantee it. So we're going to talk about ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. We're going to talk about epilepsy. We're going to talk about Huntington's. Talk about MS. Talk about myasthenia gravis, which I always laugh that we talk about myasthenia gravis so much, considering I think I've seen one myasthenia gravis patient in all of my career. And we're going to talk about Parkinson's. So those are the kind of ones. The big one we're going to hit is kind of the end Parkinson's, because Parkinson's is a lot of what you'll get a lot of questions on that on your board. You just will. Most of what you're going to see with these different disorders is the treatment from a physical therapy standpoint is pretty much going to be the same. Safety, symptom mitigation, energy conservation. But when you think about it, that's pretty much our job, right? Even if you think you go to a stroke, what's our treatment? Safety, symptom mitigation, energy conservation. That's kind of what we do. That's pretty much our standard way of going things. One of the things I'm going to talk when I talk about when you do your board or prepare for your boards is that one of the big things that you're going to be focusing on when you look at your questions is that if you have 4 answers that you're looking at, the most safe answer is always going to be the right answer. The boards are always on the absolute side of safety. Even if 2 of the answers could be potentially correct, one's a standard walker and one's parallel bars. Parallel bars is always going to be the right answer because that is the most safe answer. That's just kind of the way your boards work. They always tend towards the most safe. So what is ALS? ALS is Lou Gehrig's disease. And I'm not going to read all of these slides because otherwise I might, just go nuts, because some of this is just epidemiology and stuff like that. And if you want to read that, you can read that. This would be one case where somebody that found the disease would probably never wish he found it, right? Because this disease affected him directly. 1939, doctors at Mayo Clinic diagnosed him with this, right? Which the technical term is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. After that, he'd never play baseball again. If you look, he was diagnosed in 39, died in 2 years. That's pretty common with ALS. And there's a couple reasons for that, but We'll talk about that as we go through this, but think about it. I mean, like literally height of his baseball career, started having all kinds of neurological symptoms, went to the doctor, 39, they finally came up with this diagnosis of ALS, 41 dead, 2 years. So about the same time you're in school, it took for him to die from his disease, right? So here's the prevalence and incidence. The interesting thing here is we legitimately have zero idea what causes this. Yeah, there is an old black and white movie about it. You're exactly correct, Erica. We have zero idea. We have a lot of theories on it. There's some theories that it's a chromosomal deficiency. There's some theories that it's, environmental. There's some theory, but literally this is one where, like lupus is an interesting case. Lupus, we still don't 100% know what causes it, but we know that environment plays into it. We know that genetics plays into it. We know that, there's a couple of things that we know plays into it. With this one, we legit have no idea, right? This one is definitely sus. We don't know what causes it. We are pretty confident that there's not likely one mechanism. It's not likely that if you inherit, if it's genetic, you inherit a single gene for it, that you're likely to get it, right? Because there are times where we've seen, families had a trend of ALS and they're expecting the next child to have ALS and the child doesn't have ALS, okay? There's families that have absolutely no ALS in the family and suddenly somebody's born with ALS. So there's just no way of knowing it, right? Well, maybe did those people have ALS, but just have a recessive version of it where they didn't express it? We don't know, right? There's a lot of theories on it, but we still truly don't know. So what happens? Well, we are really going to hit this theory of upper and lower motor neuron stuff with strokes and with spinal cord injuries, right? But ALS is a disease of the UMNs and the LMNs. So this is icing level talking about upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron. We're going to get down to talking about the cake level when we talk about spinal cord injuries and strokes, right? So upper motor neurons. The upper motor neuron is a neuron that arises from the motor cortex and terminates by synapsing within the medulla or within the spinal cord. So a lot of times what we will say is the upper motor neuron is anything before the anterior horn cell, okay? So that means it's located in the spinal cord and the brain. So upper motor neuron, spinal cord, and brain. A lower motor neuron is, we start getting into the peripheral nervous system. Even though the anterior horn cell is kind of that blend between the peripheral and the central nervous system, it's called a second generation. It synapses with the upper motor neuron at the brainstem or in the spinal cord at the anterior horn cell. It's what carries the signal to the nerves or to the muscle itself and causes muscle contractions, right? So if you have an upper motor neuron injury, it's typically going to be in the brain, spinal cord. If you have a lower motor neuron injury, it's going to be out from the spinal cord typically. So they both present a little differently, right? A UMN comes in as spastic and exaggerated reflexes, right? Or what we call hyperactive reflexes. LMN is decreased spasticity, decreased tone, hypoactive reflexes, and often decreased strength. But even with the upper motor neuron, eventually you will decline. It will just take a little bit while and you will still hit decreased strength. So ALS is the most common motor neuron disease because it results in this mixed bag, meaning that they don't look purely like upper motor neuron injuries. They don't look like purely lower motor neuron injuries. You can have a patient that one arm is spastic and the other arm is completely flaccid. And that really makes treatment difficult because especially with ALS, absolutely no patient, I was gonna say no two patients look like, no patient looks alike. They can be spastic on one side, flaccid on the other, and you can go down to the legs and it's exactly the opposite. They cannot be either. They may not ever develop spasticity. They may never develop flaccidity, but they just develop weakness. So it's really weird the way this presents. And this is one of the reasons why it's so hard to diagnose, right? But it is progressive degeneration and loss of motor neurons in the spinal cord, brainstem, and motor cortex, right? This does include cranial nerves. Usually the sensory system and spinocerebellar tracts are generally spared. This is not a cool thing for patients because they may start becoming spastic and start having all kinds of muscle problems, but still experience pain. Right, so the right arm might be, might be completely spastic and pulled up like this, and you would hope that with that arm being pulled up, they can't feel anything, but they might actually have hyperactive senses and be in a lot of pain from it. Right, generally thought to spread within a region before spreading to another region, so it usually spreads one section to section to section. The most common presentation is focal asymmetrical weakness in the lower extremities or upper extremities. So what does that mean? Focal asymmetrical weakness. Let's break it down. What does focal mean? Yes, specific, exactly. It's going to be one area. Asymmetrical means what? Good job, Renee. What's asymmetrical mean? Yeah, good. Not symmetric. Very good. What does that mean? One-sided. Yeah, there we go. One side more than the other. Doesn't mean it's not going to be both sides, but one side's typically weaker than the other, right? So it's literally saying that I'm going to present with one specific side, either upper extremity or lower extremity, that's going to get focally weak. You know, I've had a patient where they've come in and their first sign of ALS is their quads completely fail on the right leg. Every other muscle in that leg is fine for the time being, but their quads failed. And literally the quads just waste away. And no matter how much strengthening we did, they just keep wasting, right? Just imagine what that would do to your life. All of a sudden you've lost your quads on one side. Yeah. Right. I had somebody where the first presentation to them was they lost their wrist extensors. That was it. Just lost left wrist extensors. And so that happens. It can also appear in the bulbar muscles, right, in the face. And they'll get buccophagia apraxia, which we talked about, right? It's the muscle that control the mouth, throat, involved in speech and swallowing. It's really common for patients later, especially later in stage of ALS, to have no speech and almost no swallowing ability. So what kind of food do you think they're going to be on later in the disease? Yeah. Yeah, nothing by mouth. Exactly. NPO, Erica. It's going to be liquid, and it's usually going to be, you know, fed in through a tube. Whether that's, you know, a nasal gastric tube, an oral gastric tube, or whether it's a direct peritoneal and feed, right? But the cardinal onset is muscle weakness. This is why it's so difficult. Because what can cause muscle weakness? Literally what? Yeah, a lot of things. Everything can cause muscle weakness. The flu, right? So it's really hard to initially diagnose. Again, the muscles it'll manifest in isolated muscles, usually distally, and then moving proximally. So that means most of the times I'm going to waste from the outside in. Now that's different than muscular dystrophy, which is one of the things that a lot of the researchers are studying. Is ALS just a flip form of muscular dystrophy, where muscular dystrophy starts from the core and works its way out? Because we know a lot about muscular dystrophy, and that was an area of heavy research. Is it the same thing, just flipped? And they found no connection to it. So back to the drawing board, right? This is why it's so frustrating. They're like, oh, let's look at this, and back to the drawing board. And let's look at this, and back to the drawing board. So they're really having trouble with this, right? Now, when this occurs, it's usually a rapid set, right? The neurons die, then the remaining neurons become overburdened. So let's think about it. Let's say I lose my quads. Can I still flex my hip? Yeah, right? Because I've still got iliopsoas, right? What about knee extension? Well, I can. It's going to be really weak because I can cause, yeah, exactly, Kelly. It's really weak because I can cause a reversal of muscle action with the gastroc, actually, and cause a eccentric load on the gas duct to allow it to extend, but it's going to be almost none there. So while I lose all that, now the muscles that are remaining are going to become overburdened, and then they're going to waste. They're also going to show this abnormal physiological and metabolic response to exercise. A lot of these patients will burn through calories like crazy. You know, you're going to see that even though they may be eating, they're just looking like emaciated because they're just burning through calories at a weird response. Or the other happens. Instead of burning through calories at a high response, they just don't burn calories at all. You know, heart rates are weird, respiratory rates are weird, right? Some other signs, symptoms, decreased speech will happen, decreased swallowing, rest impairments, and eventually cognitive impairments. It will be progressive, deteriorating, and inevitable progression, right? Can be several months to decades between onset and death, but the average between diagnosis and death is 2 to 4 years, right? So this is literally a death sentence. Your doctor tells you you have ALS. It is a death sentence. You know it, there's no way around it, right? It can take 4 years for a diagnosis, right? So you got to think about this. So for 4 years, they're trying to track down what your problem is. Then they finally get a diagnosis and they're like, yeah, by the way, in 2 years, you're going to die, right? Think about that. That's just, it's horrible. Terrible, it's horrible. Death is usually caused by respiratory failure. So you're going to find out all like these diseases, you're not going to die of ALS. You're not going to die of muscular dystrophy. You're not going to die of Parkinson's. You're going to die of pneumonia. And there have been quite a few cases lately that are dying because of what do you think? ALS patients. COVID. Yeah. Right? Because it's an opportunistic infection. Right? It likes people that are already weak. And you don't get much more weak than these people, right? So how can we treat them? Well, we can pharmacologically treat their symptoms. We can treat their pain. A lot of them are on high-level pain medications, like fentanyl patches and stuff like that. Provide them with speech and nutrition to address their swallowing issues. Respiratory management, right? They're going to be seeing a lot of respiratory therapists. A lot of them will be intubated. Most of them will eventually speak by a mechanical speech board where they're tracking with their eyes because they lose all, you know, it'd be great if I lose my speech functions and I can type, right? And type out my words I want to say. But if I've lost my arms, I can't type them out. So they get those fancy dancy, you know, visual boards that they can actually type out with their eyes and move with their eyes, right? So all of this leads into them just passing away. There are some really promising therapeutics out there. There are some new therapeutics that are looking like they can extend somebody's life by 7 to 8 years. And when you think about it, 7 to 8 years doesn't seem like a lot, right? It really doesn't. I mean, if you're thinking, oh, well, now I get to die in, you know, 9 years instead of 2 years, or 9 years instead of 4 years. To us, that doesn't seem like a lot. To the person dying from this, that's a lot, right? Think about this for a second, because I had a patient like this. He was diagnosed when his son was 9. He died when his son was 11. So 2 years. If he got 9 years out of it, he'd get to see his son graduate high school. But instead, you know, the kid got to what, 5th grade? It's a big difference for parents. I mean, all you parents know that, right? There's hopefully one of the biggest gifts your kids can ever get you is graduate and get out of the house, right? At least that's what my dad said. But yeah, I can definitely tell that, Kelly, after yesterday. But yeah, so think about how that can change things, right? There's a downside to it because most of the drugs are still in phase 2 and phase 3 trials. Actually, phase 3 trials, most of them are in. But in order to qualify for a phase 3 trial, your disease progression has to be within the first 18 months of disease progression. So think about that for a second. If it takes 2 to 4 years to diagnose it, most patients are already outside of that therapeutic window. So they don't get it. And so they'll never get that medication. And we'll never have full efficacy trials because that's the way it's designed. Right? I can't even tell you how wrong that is. That we can't get this drug to market because we don't have enough trials to prove that it both works and is safe, right? Because guess what one of the side effects of most of the ALS drugs are? Death. But like, think about it to yourself. If you were told, well, look, you're going to die anyway. Here's this drug that could possibly extend your life by 7 years, possibly, or it could kill you. I don't know. I'd be on there going, well, I'm going to die anyway. I might as well try this and see if it works. What does everyone else think? I mean, that's my thought process. I'd rather do it and see if it works. Yeah, it's any drug, exactly right. Yeah, I'm like, yeah, just, well, what have you got, this literally, what have you got to lose? You're gonna die. You can die from the disease or die from the drug, or you can get 7 years, right? Or die here, exactly, right? Because you proved this drug works. And then there are people that'll say, why are we, and I'm not joking, this was a debate on Capitol Hill about 2 years ago, because I watched it, because one of my patients that I had previously, his wife was the same patient, his wife had gone to Capitol Hill to kind of lobby for this. And I'm not joking, one of the questions, one of the guys on the Senate hearing about this said was, well, why are we focusing on drugs that are for people that are going to die anyway? Don't we have better drugs we can focus on? It may be. You're exactly right. I didn't think about that, Erica, either. There's a good point. Erica says, you know, I think there might be a lot going on mentally for them. They may not be able to make a big decision like that. You're probably right. But they should have the option to make that decision. Shouldn't they? I mean, that's what it comes down to. And it's the point of science, right? The point of science is to make our lives better. And it's just, we can make 3,000 different erection pills so that people in their 90s can have sex, but we're worried about giving somebody 7 years extra with their family. It just blows my mind. And when I heard that comment, you know, it just blew my mind that a senator could be that callous. But do you want to bet if that senator gets ALS, their tune's not going to change? 100%. Yeah, or their kid, exactly, right? Their kid will get it because magically they'll be within that 18 months. I'm not even going to go there. But just think about that first. It's just callous disregard for human life. It just is. If nothing else, from Law and Order, I've learned from watching D.A. McCoy, that is depraved indifference to human life. That's my opinion. Everything is depraved indifference to human life on Law and Order. No Law and Order fans here? I'm a Law and Order junkie. I love it. I should have been a lawyer. Probably should have been. So what are our jobs? Well, just SVU sometimes burns me out. That one you get to see the dregs of society. So anyway, so what do we focus on? Well, we used to focus on quality of life with these patients, but in reality, we're not focusing on quality of life, right? We're focusing on quality of death. Can this person die with dignity? Right? So we're going to focus on maximizing function, making them functional as long as possible, compensating where we can, right? But understanding that this disease progression can't be altered or reversed. You know, one of the big things that, because Mark was the guy that I worked with, one of the big things Mark would always say is, man, I feel like I'm getting stronger. And it was really hard for me because I wanted to tell, I just wanted, you know, you walk that fine line of encouragement but also reality, because he wasn't getting stronger. He just wasn't losing as much, right? Just, yeah, right. And so you have to, I didn't correct him so much as just let him kind of go on, right? But you have patients like, well, I'm gonna get better from this. I'm gonna get healthy. Sometimes you have to bring them down to reality and say, this is a disease you can't take lightly. This will kill you, right? The main thing here we have to focus on, you're going to find this with this disease, we're going to find it with MS, and we're going to find it with Parkinson's, is we have to be careful not to overburden the patient, because we can actually push them too hard and overburden their functional motor neurons, which will then eventually make them worse, right? So there's this really fine line, and literally it's a balance beam we walk. Is this enough, but not enough to basically kill them, right? The patient will respond a lot of times to abnormal response to exercises and vitals and energy, so we have to monitor that. If we notice that they're sweating a lot, their heart rate's up, we may have to back down our treatment, and that includes telling the patient, hey, we need to step it back here because we want you to come on Thursday, and if you keep going this way, you're probably not going to come on Thursday. Safety, including transfers and equipment, right? We're going to have to teach patients how to use Hoyer lifts. We're going to have to, families how to use Hoyer lifts. Adaptive equipment like the speech board, which we'll be going through speech for. There's a lot of different things. I had one patient that the only thing he had left was his index finger, right? So every other muscle pretty much wasted away. For some reason, the index finger he had both flexors and extensors for. Didn't go away. And he had that up till he died. So then we have to figure out, how can we get this functional muscle to do most of the stuff the rest of his body would do? Right? So you develop a complex little motor board that he can reach for different stuff, like moving his wheelchair, increasing his oxygen if he needs to increase his oxygen. There's all kinds of stuff we can do. And we want to teach a patient to conserve as much energy as possible for focusing on life tasks, right? Which is really hard later in life, because a lot of these patients go into advocacy. A lot of them go into advocacy. They really fight for people that are just getting the disease. And the problem with that is, by burning so much energy fighting for other people, what are they really doing to themselves? Yeah, they're burning themselves out. Exactly. They're literally killing themselves to save somebody else. And you don't get much more, caring for your own man than that, which is kind of, it's sad. ALS is something that that one terrifies me, right? Epilepsy, otherwise known as seizure disorder, right? So looking at this, we got our little prevalence and incidence rates here. It shows there's a lot of epileptics in the United States. Think about that. This one struck me when I was doing this last night. I didn't realize that, basically, it's not 10%. It's about 1% of the population is epileptic. 3.4 million people. Van Gogh had epilepsy, you're right. But think about that for a second. That's just crazy. Like, out of all these diseases, this is the most prevalent. The cause of generalized epilepsy, which is the what's called idiopathic epilepsy. Exactly, right? That's one of the things I was going to mention, right? Before we knew what epilepsy was, it was possession. Right? Possession by demons, possession by spirits, whatever it may be. And if you ever look at the way, like, you watch the possession movies, you watch Exorcist or The Exorcism of Emily Rose or any of those, and you watch those people that are on that show, you're like, man, they're having a seizure. Just I don't know. I'm not saying that possession isn't real, because I've seen too many weird stuff to say that it's not. But epilepsy is what they viewed it as, right? But idiopathic or generalized epilepsy, we don't know what causes it. There's some genetic component to it that we do know, that if your family members have epilepsy, you're likely to have epilepsy. So it's really important to watch for that. But we are showing that TBIs, along with toxins, are likely to definitely trigger epilepsy, right? So blows to the head. Strokes can also cause it, but not as likely unless it's a focal stroke in specific areas. Definitely drugs. There are all kinds of drugs that we know, synthetic heroin, a couple others that are likely to cause you epilepsy. But we just know, like most of the diseases we're going to talk about, there's typically not one single thing that causes it. So what do they look like? Well, we have active and absent seizures we're going to talk about, right? A lot of them have temporary confusion. They may have a staring spell, which is probably the creepiest seizure you can have, and we'll talk about that. Uncontrollable jerking, loss of consciousness or awareness. And a lot of times these patients have a lot of deja vu and anxiety. And so if you have a kid or a family member that is constantly having these deja vu moments, they may not actually be having. So what does deja vu mean? Deja vu means already seen, right? Those are the people like, man, I feel like I've been here before. In reality, what it is for a few seconds, their brain shut off and they're rebooted, right? It's just like a computer, right? If you're on your Windows computer and all of a sudden you've got the pinwheel, or that's Mac. Mac is the pinwheel. You've got the hourglass of death on Windows, or the cursor's frozen. Blue screen of death. Your computer's having a seizure. You reboot the computer, most of the time you're good. Then every now and then you reboot the computer and it's not so good, right? That would be bad seizures. Same thing with people. Fear is common. A lot of the patients will have fear of either having a seizure or the things they see when they have seizures. Because sometimes they can see some really weird things when they're having seizures. So focal seizures. We have two main focal types of seizures, meaning that they're the focus type, right? We have seizures without LOC. What's LOC mean? What's that abbreviation in med term? Let's see if anyone knows it. If you have a car accident and bump your head, a lot of times, yes, loss of consciousness. Good. That's an important thing to know. So we have focal seizures without loss of consciousness, and then we have focal seizures with what we call impaired awareness, which also includes loss of consciousness, right? So without, it may alter their emotions or change the way things smell, feel, taste, or sound. I had a kid that I treated back in Pennsylvania that when he was starting to have a seizure would smell cherries. Good, Jared. You saw a lot of it in your clinic that you went out to? It's kind of freaky. Just is, right? But I remember little Jamie, he used to say when I smelled cherries, he knew a seizure was coming on. I don't know what part of the brain triggered this, but you would know. He'd be like, Mr. Keever, I'm smelling cherries. And I'd know at that point he's going to go into a seizure. And sure enough, he'd go into a seizure within a couple of seconds of saying that. And you got to wonder, is that the brain giving him some sort of a warning sign? Right. It does sound like an episode of House, right? But you got to think, does the brain know it needs to have a seizure? So was it warning the kid? Right? I don't know. It's kind of weird. The way the brain, that's why I like neuro, because the brain works so weirdly. May lose taste, sound. Involuntary jerking is usually common, usually arm and legs. Spontaneous symptoms can occur like tingling, dizziness, flashing lights, right? And ironically enough, they can see flashing lights, or flashing lights can cause a seizure. So we got to be careful with that too. Impaired awareness, they can completely lose conscious awareness. They may stare off into space. They may respond normally. They may not respond normally. They may perform repetitive movements, right? I've seen a seizure person that literally, that was their seizure. They were doing almost a chorea movement, right? Walking in circles. So the types of seizures. These are important to know because this is important to be able to distinguish with your patient, right? Absent seizures are what used to be called petit mal seizures, right? What does petit mal mean? Little bad seizures. That's really what it means, right? These are most common in children, and they can be really terrifying to see in kids. Most times, if you have a kid that is having these type of seizures, they'll be sitting there in the chair and they're just gone. This is why it's just so weird and so creepy to see. You know, suddenly you're working with little Timmy, and suddenly Timmy's just doing like this. And it's not his attention that's gone. Like, the lights are on, but no one's home at that given moment. His mind is not his own. Never mind. One of you out of there will get that. That's an 80s reference there. But staring off into space is common. Subtle body movements are common, right? Lip smacking. Okay. See, Michelle at least got it. I appreciate it. You make me feel better, Michelle. Can often occur in clusters. So they'll often come back out of it and then go right back into that seizure. And usually they're not aware of it. So they'll go into this absent seizure and come out just like nothing happened. And they're standing there going, why are all these people around me? Because they think they just kicked a ball and it's time to run the base or something like that. Right? It's kind of wild when they have this. Tonic seizures, when you hear tonic, think spasm, because these are causing stiffening of your muscles, usually the back, arms, legs, right? So these are your typical tight up seizures. They're not going to have jerking. So you literally are just going to not lock up, right? Tonic, gin and tonic, exactly. Atonic seizures or drop seizures are a little different. These are what you see on shows, right? This is your classic seizure you see on shows, or the bottom on the tonic-clonic. The atonic ones are your thrashing, falling down seizures, right? Clonic or repeated rhythmic jerking muscles of the face on arms. Myoclonic appears brief jerks. So these are just almost like tics when you talk about myoclonic, right? And then the tonic-clonics are your big ones, right? These are the big bad seizures, as it's called grand mal, right? We don't call them that anymore. We now call them tonic-clonics. So if you've been a clinician like I have for a long time, you have to get out of the habit of calling things different names. It's really fun. They change them on you. I learned them as grand mal. Well, now they're tonic-clonic. Get over it. These are the most dramatic type of epileptic seizures. Cause brief loss of consciousness, body stiffening, shaking, sometimes even loss of bladder control, biting of your tongue. May also become anoxic. Depending upon how you do it, may shut the blood flow off to your brain. So what happens here? Well, we have to lower the frequency of seizures, and there's all kinds of anticonvulsants, anti-stopping convulsants seizures, right? There's all kinds of them out there. There's like, I'm drawing a blank right now thinking what they're all called at this point. I know there's one with a T and I can't think of it because I was on it for a while. Because it also treats migraines. But it's interesting. We found a specific strain of CBD called Charlotte's Web strain. Has anyone ever heard of this strain, or have I talked about this before? I don't want to I talked about it before, okay. Or you've heard of it. So I don't want to repeat myself if I've talked about something. You've heard of it? Okay. So why do you think it's called Charlotte's Web? Does anyone know? Well, because the first girl that used it, and she just passed actually in June, I think. The first girl that they used this on was named Charlotte. And guess what her favorite book was? Charlotte's Web. Because it was a book about her, right? But they found a specific strain of CBD that they can use that actually has shown high rates of effect on children with seizures. And now Charlotte's Web's its own company. It develops just one type of CBD, and it's just the Charlotte's Web strain. And even in adults, it's starting to show really good reductions in seizures if taken every day. And so then people are like, oh, well, they're using marijuana. Not really. This one is based on marijuana. It's not a hemp-based CBD, so it does have some THC in it. There's no way around that. Right? So technically, if you took this strain, you could pop positive on a drug screen, right? It's got a very low level, but it still has it. But it's amazing. I've seen kids where they're having 7 to 10 seizures a week go down to 1 a month from it. Yeah, it is. It's awesome, right? That just blows your mind and just goes to show that we don't understand how every plant in our environment works. Right? There's still stuff out there. We can find natural cures, and we may not need to go synthetic for everything. Right? But it's an amazing, and for adults that take this stuff that are allowed to, it's shown some really good efficacy and pain relief too, without the use of opiates. So that means we know it works on the brain and the mu opioid receptors, right? So again, I'm not a marijuana smoker. I'm not anything like that, but I do believe that we need to research this further because I think there's some hidden gems in, cannabis that could possibly help us in the future and get people off pain meds, get people off seizures, right? And we've already had one party that has said specifically, which blows my mind, a former district attorney that said if their party takes the White House, they are going to move to decriminalize marijuana, which to me is fantastic. One of the biggest opponents of marijuana that was in the Senate, does anyone know? It was a senator for here in Nevada. Do you know who one of the biggest opponents for marijuana was in the Senate? He was our senator. The pirate himself, Harry Reid. He was a big opponent to marijuana, right? You want to know what the funny thing is now? Harry Reid is like 90% investor in 3 of the largest grow farms here in Nevada. He is. And if you ask him now, he'll say, I made a mistake. Because he was sold on the Reagan. Yeah, well, that's the other part of it. Exactly, Kelly. I'm not going to say that out loud, but yeah. He was sold on the Reagan era part of marijuana. And, growing up, I grew up in the Reagan time period. And I'm going to say Michelle did as well. Sorry, Michelle. I'm going to call you out on that. And we were told that, yes. What was the big term for marijuana growing up? Does anyone remember what they used to call marijuana? It's the what? Devil's lettuce. Yeah, that too. It's the gateway drug. Yeah, it's the gateway drug. If you take one sniff, one smell of the pot, you're in one step to cocaine and being in the gutter. Right? It can be, right? There, exactly. It can be. There's 100% proof that there are people that they take it and it can lead them right down that nasty path. But I'd probably say that if I'm looking at this right now, that Oxycontin is probably the bigger gateway drug than marijuana. Just saying. But anyway, I'm going to get off that subject before I really go. DBS, deep brain stimulation, is another one that we have out there. Now, this can be the most dangerous because what are we doing if we're going to do deep brain stimulation? Or open up the head. Or we're going to go in and implant little electrodes on the brain. Yeah, surgery on the brain. And brain surgery is no joke, right? I'll tell you, remind me to tell a story about that when I'm not on camera or on recording. So I've got a funny story about that in a little bit. Yeah, it tickles the brain, essentially. Got a funny story about that just happened recently, and I don't want to be on camera when I talk about that story. Diet and avoidance of toxins such as recreational drugs. So there are a lot of studies that show recreational drugs like cocaine, anything type of amphetamine causes seizures to happen more frequently. Avoidance of bright flashing lights, including possible video games. For those of you guys that play video games, right? You get that warning screen as soon as it pops up that says, warning, this game has been known to induce seizures and blah, 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 blah. Mario Kart, especially like Rainbow Road, right? Flashing all the time. There's that one lightsaber game that's out now where it's a VR where you're slashing at things with a lightsaber. There's all kinds of them out there that are really bright and flashy. We know those just aren't good for kids. Beat Saber, okay? I'd be willing to bet like something like Fall Guys wouldn't be good for somebody that's got seizure disorder because of all the bright and changing colors and stuff like that. Doesn't mean they can't play video games. They just have to be careful, right? Same thing with television. Something like The Edge of Tomorrow may not be the best movie for somebody like that to watch because of all the explosions, right? What else? Like Expendables with all the explosions. So that might be the best thing for somebody with seizures to watch. So what do? Well, we focus on keeping a patient functional as long as possible, right? Including on teaching them how to handle a seizure, right? So let's say your patient has a full tonic-clonic seizure. What do you do as a PTA? The old theory was you basically laid on top of them and hugged them and restricted them. Yeah, exactly. You're right, Jared. There was a scene in Incredibles 2 that had something about that. I don't remember which one it was, but there was one that was seizure-inducing in it. Just in general, these Incredibles was seizure-inducing, but that's beside the point. But it used to be, it used to be that we used to basically lay them on the ground and hug them and try to restrict them. We've learned not so good anymore, because if their muscles are constantly jerking, you actually have a possibility of ripping muscles off the bone or fracturing bones, right? The best thing to do is move them to an open environment, roll them to the side and clear the surroundings, right? Why are we going to roll them to the side if we can? Either they vomit or to keep their tongue from rolling back in their throat, because you can actually choke on your tongue, right? The other thing we used to do is we used to shove something in their mouth, right? Now we don't do that because we know that they do bite down, right? And there's a possibility of just shattering their teeth. So clear the area, make it as safe as possible. What if your patient's having an absence seizure and they just suddenly go? Sometimes I feel like I do that teaching you guys. Just sit them down, right? And let them go through it, right? Same thing if you're walking a patient to go full tonic-clonic. Get them down in a safe area, clear the area, let it go. Monitor them, right? Make sure that you have an ability to check them at least, because especially if they're going with the full absence seizure, there have been patients that have had absence seizures and had a heart attack in it. So make sure you're checking them at least, right? It can be really difficult. It can be hard to take a pulse rate, right? Sometimes the best thing might be to do is if you can get a pulse ox shoved on one of their fingers. If nothing else, it gives you something. Yeah, there's a lot of people that do that wear helmets that have frequent seizures, right? And my friends with as many concussions that I had, they're like, we're going to go to a Falcons game and get Matt Ryan to give us his helmet and keep it for you. Like, shut up, friends. Yeah, and then you got to wonder, Kelly, was it the mirrors in the bathroom that might have caused it, right? Kelly says she had somebody that had it up, found them in the bathroom all the time. So there's all kinds of things that can cause this. So we need to clear it. So regular physical exercise, and it's moderate, has been shown to reduce the incidence of active seizures. That means cardiovascular training, right? That means getting their overall health up, getting their weight down. Having a healthy lifestyle has shown that it can help reduce the overall effect of seizures. That means being active, safe training, including avoiding triggering events. And I've been involved with some neuropsychologists that have been working with seizure disorder patients where their job is to trigger the seizure. And I've been there to make sure that the patient's safe because they're maybe not trained on false control, right? So figuring out what triggers them and then stopping doing it. So if they're like, well, you know, every time I watch Survivor, I have a seizure. What do you think a good suggestion would be? Stop watching Survivor, right? So that's the kind of things we're going to talk to them. Conservation and relaxation techniques. Relaxation techniques are really good at reducing the overall impact of seizures. So if you have somebody that has it and knows that they're the type of people that know that what causes it and brings it on, you can teach them to do relaxation training that might lessen the effect of seizures, or maybe even not stop it, but stop it from happening. ACB is really good to teach these people. Active cycle of breathing, right? Teach the belly breathing going on. You know, thoracic expansion. Maybe not the clearance because they don't have anything to clearance, but you do have to teach them kind of the breathing and relaxation techniques. Tai Chi has been shown to work really well with these patients. All right, Huntington's disease. This is probably my most misspelled disease. I don't know what it is about this disease. I've written papers on this, and I still to this day cannot spell this. For some reason, I think it should be Huntington's. I think it's because in Pennsylvania we have a city that's Huntingdon and not Huntington, so it gets stuck in my brain that way. But it's Huntington's disease. Again, you see the overall effect of it. This is a disease of Caucasian people, just to let you know, and typically Caucasian women. They do know this one, though. They know what causes Huntington's. It is a genetic disorder. That means if you have a family member that has it, you are likely to have Huntington's. It is autosomal dominant. What does that mean? You guys remember doing the gene square before? Have you guys learned the gene square? Yeah, Punnett squares. Right? Anyone not remember the gene square? Or know what I'm talking about? Does anyone not understand? Okay, then let's talk about it because that's important to know for your boards. All right, so let's see here. We're going to draw it out. So we're going to say mom is down, dad is across, right? So when we draw out genes and we talk about it, a capital letter is a dominant gene. A lowercase letter is a recessive gene, right? So this will determine how your kids, because this can help with understanding who gets blue eyes. Right? So blue eyes is a recessive gene. So let's say mom has Huntington's and dad does not, right? So mom can have two different genes then. Mom can be AA, capital A, meaning she has both genes for Huntington's. Because it's autosomal dominant, mom can be either of these genotypes, right? So she can either be AA, A capital A, or lowercase a, capital A, because both of those indicate that mom has the disease. Lowercase a means no one, whoever that is, whether that's mom or dad, they do not have the disease. They're a recessive dominant, right? So they do not have that. So we're going to go with mom having lowercase, capital A, lowercase a. Where's my little cursor at? There it is. So here's mom. And we'll say dad is recessive. So dad does not have any traits for Huntington's. What that means is if they have 4 kids, we're going to go that plus that equals that. That plus that equals that. This plus this equals this. This plus this equals this. I'm going to erase those real quick, all the lines I just drew. So in the case of even one dominant gene for this disease, 50% of your kids that get born are going to have Huntington's. As you have here, we have, if they have 4 kids, 2 have it, 2 don't. So you have a 50-50 shot of getting Huntington's. Right? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So let's change this up here real quick. Because now we're going to say that mom is double dominant. What percentage of their kids are going to have Huntington's? All of them. Because now all of the children come out this way. And because it is a dominant disorder, all of them are going to get the capital letter. All of them are going to come out with Huntington's. right? Let's change it one more way. And let's move mom back to dominant recessive. We're going to say now dad is the same genotype. So now if you look at this, you only have a 25% chance of not getting Huntington's. The only way you can escape this is if neither of your parent have the gene for Huntington's. It's the only way you can truly escape it. Does that make sense? If one of your family members has Huntington's, you're in trouble. There's a good, at minimum, at bare minimum, there's a 50% chance that you're going to get it. More than likely, probably 75%. You know, if not 100. So that's kind of important to understand. I know that we probably haven't done those Punnett squares since, yeah, get tested before reproducing, exactly. I know it's probably been since, I learned that I think I want to say it was 7th grade, maybe. Right, so it's kind of important to understand. So it's a mutation. Yeah, 7 for you too, exactly, right? It's a mutation of a gene called Huntington that causes cytosine, adenine, and guanine building blocks of DNA to repeat more times than need be, right? So talk about at minimum 50-50 shot. A child who does not inherit Huntington's typically can't pass it on. So typically, if you are the double recessive trait, you can't pass it on. There's a weird triple gene that can pass it on, but most of the time, don't worry about that. We diagnose by genetic test, medical history, brain imaging. Causes brain cells to die. This is the sad part. And actually, just like every other thing, there's a house episode for that. Just like every medical condition, there's a house episode for it. Because one of the doctors, yes, exactly, one of the docs had Huntington's. Well, it's Cameron, wasn't it, I think? If I remember correctly, or one of them. Maybe it wasn't her. Yeah. But again, there's a house episode for it. It just is. Causes brain cells to die, like I said, right? I have the digital version of it. I was working my way back through it the other week. Signs and symptoms. Patient typically gets uncontrolled movements or chorea. Chorea is that dance-like movement. So they're reaching to do things and they're kind of swimming to do it, right? They can also get athetosis chorea, right? Where they get that kind of snake-like movement. They'll often have abnormal body postures due to abnormal writing response. So they might stand like this. They might stand like this. They might be retropulsed. They will have changes in behavior as it starts breaking down your frontal lobe. Impaired coordination is common, slurred speech, and difficulty feeding and swallowing. I think I have Huntington's. All of that comes into play. So the interesting thing about this is there's no treatment for it. They can give them tetrabenazine and deutetrabenazine to treat the chorea. It is a sad, you're exactly right, Kelly. It's really sad to watch somebody with this. There's medicines we can give to ease the chorea, ease the hallucinations, ease the violent outbursts, but the brain is just basically melting. Right? There's no way to redo that. So not much we can do about it. It's a sad progressive disease. And it's just, I don't even know it's just sad. If you have a sister or brother that has Huntington's, more than likely you have the gene. Handrails at home, assistive devices for activities, eating, drinking utensils, all this can help with them. The main thing here for us is we're going to enhance their strength, flexibility, balance, and coordination. So we're going to do a lot of everyday activities with them that we would normally do in physical therapy, all the stuff you normally would do with patients, because we want to help maintain their mobility as much as possible. Eventually, they probably are going to end up institutionalized. It just, it is what it is. And oftentimes it's not going to be like they get to 60 and they're institutionalized. I've seen a couple of patients where they're in their 40s and they're in a nursing home. Kelly, I think you said before that you had a friend that had Huntington's, and it's just not a fun disease to watch. Your cousin. Good news here. Regular physical moderate exercise has been shown to reduce the decline. This is for any neurological disorder for your brain. There's this link between exercise and brain function. You just tweeted a patient with tweeted. Oh my God. Where's my brain at? You just tweeted. Put a weight vest on. Yeah, weight vests work well for posture training. You're exactly correct. But the only problem is that fatigues them too, right? Then they've got to do more work. So it's a double-edged sword there again. But yeah, there's this thing that it's even with Parkinson's. I'm going to talk heavily about that because I know that's my route I'm heading. There's a lot of studies that show regular mental activity and regular physical activity can help reduce neurological decline. So for you guys, right, you have family members that are getting up there in age, maybe mom, dad, grandpa, grandma. The more they are active, the more cognitively they will retain. So it's really important. We'll talk about that. But my big example of that is Joe Paterno, who is, if you go to Pennsylvania, Joe Paterno is like second only to God. It's at any age. Exactly, Kelly. It's at any age. But if you go to Pennsylvania, Joe Paterno is only second to God. I'm telling you right off the bat. He's the former coach of Penn State. And we can talk about the other problems he had, but whatever it is, while he was coach at Penn State, he was fantastic. He gets fired from Penn State and dies in a year. Because his brain just declined that quickly because he stopped doing all the stuff he would normally do. Right? It's amazing how just stopping regular activity causes this decline, right? Safety training, including avoiding trigger events, conservation of energy, all that stuff we've already talked about. Let's take a break and we'll come back to muscular sclerosis. Let me pause. All right, so we are back. So prevalence, we're talking about multiple sclerosis. I can speak today. MS is another large prevalence disorder here, right? It has a high breakdown in cooler climates, which will come to make sense when you find out that it has heat intolerance. So I'm not so sure that the breakdown itself is driven by the area so much as the people living in that area because they have MS. So it's a unique situation with MS, but there is this high breakdown in the northern United States, Canada, Northern Europe, specifically Scandinavia and Europe. As you get more towards the southern United States, the overall effectiveness or the overall breakdown of MS starts going lower, and then the closer you get to the equator, definitely it gets less. But what we're going to find out is heat intolerance is one of the main signs of it. So if you had MS and you live by the equator, the likelihood is you're going to move. So I'm not so sure that it's specifically related geographics. It is women greater than men. It's typically onset between 15 and 45 years old. I don't want to talk about this because this is now known as the great crippler of young adults. We don't have a high incidence rate of it here in Las Vegas, but we do have a high incidence rates of people moving to Las Vegas with it. So if you're born here, you live here most of your life, the likelihood of you developing MS is pretty low. But we have a high amount of people that move here and think that this is going to be good for them. And then they find out, oh my God, it's 30,000 degrees outside and the sidewalk is melting, and find out how that affects their overall MS. This is one that affects me personally because one of my best friends has this. So this is one that I've had a lot of experience with. Sorry, need a little drink. So again, don't know anything about it specifically. We do know that genetics is playing a factor in it. We do know it's not hereditary, meaning that if your mom or dad have it, you may not get it. But what we do know is if anyone in your family has it, there's a chance for you to get it. It doesn't have to be direct, you know, mom, dad, brother, sister, grandma, grandpa. It can be aunt. It can be cousin. We know that there's something about the genetics that if somebody in your family has it, there's a chance for you to get it. Interestingly enough, I was reading a study when I was prepping this lecture a little bit last night that looked at families that have it but are split by geographic region. And the people that live in the low geographic region actually, again, don't develop it in the same family that has MS. So does the geographic region play into it? I don't know. It is considered an autoimmune disorder, even though it does attack the brain and the spinal cord. So it is the body's own immune system. It's actually going to be caused by Schwann cell problems, which we're going to talk about. Schwann cells. Environmental contributions do play into it, right? And we know that there is some possible infectious disease with this. We know that our buddy HSV has people that have multiple versions of long-term HSV have been shown to have MS. What is HSV? What's our buddy HSV? Should have learned about this in patho. It's the disease that 90% of us in this room have right now. Herpes, yes. I always used to love doing that when I taught patho. When I started teaching about this infectious disease, I'd be like, so everyone who has herpes, raise your hands in here. And everyone would be looking around at each other like, I'm not raising my hands that I have herpes. And so I'd get no one. I'd be like, you're all lying. Because 90% of you in here have herpes. Right? If you had a cold sore, you have the herpes virus latent in you. It's just the way it is. It's one of those that just keeps coming back and visiting us, right? There is some signs that HSV plays into multiple sclerosis later in life. Good news is, you know, like I said back here, it's about 15 to 45. So if you make it to 45 and you don't have an onset of it, you're pretty safe. Just saying. I'm shooting for it. Good. The most widely accepted theory is autoimmune disease induced by viral or other infectious agent, right? The immune system triggers production of T lymphocytes, macrophages, and immunoglobulins that in turn command to trigger a protein called antigen is activated, producing an autoimmune cytotoxic events within the CNS. The blood-brain barrier fails and myelin is sensitized. Wow, that's a speech. So basically what it says is your white blood cells in the body break down the blood-brain barrier. And then by breaking down the blood-brain barrier, it triggers your immunologic system inside your nervous system to fight that. And because it fights that, it breaks down the myelin in your body. That's really what's the basic way you can look at this, right? So your myelin sheaths start deteriorating. What is myelin's job in the CNS? What does it help promote? Well, protect spine. Yeah, it does protect spine. Yeah, it helps promote. You remember what that type of conduction is called? I don't care about spelling. You're fine. Saltatory conduction. Good, right? That's that jumping from the nodes of Ranvier to the Ranvier to the nodes of Ranvier. Do you remember that whole fun thing? Does anyone not remember what I'm talking about? That I have to draw it out for you? Is anyone awake? Okay, good. Thank you, Renee. I appreciate it. She's like, well, you remember. Move on, Mr. McKeever. I'm done. I remember everything. Just like Five Finger Death Punch. Small percentage will die of the disease. Thank you, Jaira. Appreciate it. Highly recommend, if you guys are interested in music, highly recommend the new Corey Taylor album. And I'm not just pushing it because I know him, but highly recommend the new Corey Taylor album. Anyway, typically, again, like everything else, death is caused by infection. Interestingly enough, with MS, all the people that I've seen die from MS, the people I've seen die that have MS, have been from UTIs. So it's kind of interesting. I've seen more UTI than I've seen respiratory, but respiratory happens too. I've got a picture of my buddy coming up here. No, not a picture of him, but a picture of his brain. You'll see what we're talking about. 74% survive 25 years after the symptoms. But here's the deal. At about 15 years after onset, 50% require the use of an assistive device. 20%, 20 years after that, 50% require a wheelchair. He was diagnosed, so let me think. I was married in 2001. And at that point, his son was 2 years old. So he would have been diagnosed in 99. So it's now 2020. I want to say about 5 years ago, he went to a walker. So he's about following the standards here. So the first thing that happens, the very first problem most patients have is a vision problem. And it was his. He had scotomas. So you may get diplopia, double vision. What's a scotoma? Does anyone know? No one knows? Okay. I'm just going to go with that because no one's awake. Scotomas are dark spots in your vision. And it may not be a black spot that you can't see through, but it's some of those where maybe you're looking and it feels like you're looking through like a dark pair of sunglasses, not one spot. Nystagmus is common, optic neuritis, and then internuclear ophthalmoplegia. We were talking about multiple sclerosis before Cox decided to give me the boot. So optic signs we talked about. Fatigue is common. The big one that most of the patients complain about is heat intolerance. And when I'm talking heat intolerance, anything above 85 degrees is uncomfortable for them. So this weather we have is definitely not the best for them. Gait problems are real common, ataxia. All these fun words, dysmetria, dyssynergia, dysdiadochokinesia, ataxia are all common with them. Does anyone know what dysmetria is? Dys meaning difficulty, metria meaning metric, meaning distance. So difficulty judging distances. Dyssynergia we talked about. And dysdiadochokinesia is that one fun, wonderful one that, you know, you have problems with rapid alternating movements. That's a touching your nose problem. And other things like reaching for stuff with one hand, doing something else with the other. Sexual dysfunction is really common, 91% in males, 72% in females, but that kind of makes sense why it doesn't affect females as much, because female sexual reproduction is driven by hormones, where men's there's a lot more into it than just hormones. You know, that's just the way it is. We'll talk about that with spinal cord injury too, that it's completely possible for somebody with a spinal cord injury, if you're female, to have a child, but it's usually impossible for males to have children. Well, always impossible for males to have children, but you know what I mean. Headaches common, often called ice pick headaches, where it feels like somebody's jamming an ice pick in the back of their eyes. Hyperpathia is common. Trigeminal neuralgia is also one of the major problems. That's one of the problems one of my friends has as well, is trigeminal neuralgia, which is inflammation of that trigeminal nerve. And a lot of times when you think of trigeminal nerve, this is the distribution pattern of the trigeminal nerve. So if they'll often say they have lightning shooting out the side of their face, that's trigeminal neuralgia. Poor regulation of the cardiovascular system leads to those temperature problems, cognitive deficits. He's really starting to have that now, and he's not so happy about that he's actually starting to forget things. And he's a anthropologist, so he does a lot with, it's funny, he's an anthropologist for Southwest Indians, Southwest Native Americans, and Egyptians. So he picked the two absolute worst, not racism, or the two worst populations. It was what he was interested in. He wanted to be an anthropologist all his life, and he picked those two, and then got his degree, and then got MS. So he picked the two worst populations for an MS person to actually be involved in, which is hilarious. He's teaching a lot more now, though, too, which I told him that's pretty much all you can do with an anthropology degree, but whatever. Yeah, so Kaylee said her dentist hit the trigeminal nerve. Now she's got burning in her tongue. Yeah, that happens quite frequently, actually, where they just, especially if it was a top wisdom tooth they took out that he hit it. Yeah, which one? Do you know which one he hit it with, though? Or he just said, too bad I hit it?
I don't feel like typing. He didn't tell me when it happened. I just noticed the feeling like a long time after, like I was supposed to be healed. And so I kept calling and telling him, and he was like, yeah. So he gave me like I can go to a specialist, like a nerve specialist, but there's really nothing they can do.
Yeah, the only thing they really do is ablate the nerve. Yes, that's really common. He'll pretend like nothing happened. Most doctors will. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, like he told me, he said it's a possibility, there's a good chance. But
I
he
didn't
said,
do
of
it.
course, right. And then so the surgery happened, and then right after, of course, I was just all loopy and bleeding everywhere. And then he kept telling me like, oh, it's gonna be okay, you're gonna heal, and then like gave me steroids, and then no, it never healed.
Yeah, the only thing they really can do is ablate that part of the trigeminal nerve, which is basically fry it off, unfortunately. Sorry about that. That sucks. That really does suck. Hearing loss, common respiratory problems are common. How they diagnose MS. I'm going to show you an MRI of my friend's brain. You can clearly see how they can diagnose it. Parts of the brain that are supposed to be myelinated show up as non-myelinated. That's how they're going to do it. So they're going to diagnose the MRI, and then they're going to get CSF data and look to see if there's abnormal white blood cells in the CSF, which there shouldn't be. It shouldn't be, as it says here, elevated total immunoglobulin in the spinal fluid and presence of, yeah, that word there, oligoclonal Ig bands. I can't even say that. Abnormal evoked potentials are common, which we're going to talk about down here, which is Lermet's sign. I want you to make sure that you put a star beside Lermet's sign or highlight it or something, whatever you do. Lermet's sign is a common sign of somebody that has MS. There are some other neurological conditions that goes along with too, but it's a common MS sign. This is an electric shock sensation down the spine into the lower extremities when the neck is flexed forward, right? It can also happen in extreme extension as well. Sometimes, most of the time it's flexed forward. So the test for Lermet's is you'll have the patient lean forward, and then you take two fingers and tap on the back of the neck, just at the base of the spine or base of the skull. And if you have a positive sign, if you do that and you have positive, what will happen is you'll feel shocking sensations down in the leg. That indicates a possible lesion in the caudal medulla or in the posterior columns. Fun fact about this, it's also seen in nitrous oxide drug abusers. So, if people are abusing nitrous oxide for drugs, doing whippets, it's also seen in those patients. But Lermet's is a common symptom of patients with MS. A lot of times when you do that, they'll extend their knees. It's really wild. So this is another slide to star. You need to know the types of MS, and the names tell you what they are. Relapsing, remitting. It gets worse, it gets better, right? That is the most common. Gets worse, it gets better. It gets worse, it gets better. It gets worse, it gets better. That's the most common MS. So they'll feel good for a period of time, then they'll suck. Then they'll feel good, then they'll suck. Primary progressive is the worst type to have. That is just that constant progressive worsening of the disease. There's no relapses, no remissions, whatever. And it's a constant, steady forward progression. Secondary progressive, it starts with the relapsing remitting. They get better, gets worse, get better, gets worse. And then eventually it just doesn't get better anymore. So about 50% of the people in the relapsing remitting get this type. And then progressive relapsing is ones where they have clear flares, right? So everything flares up, but they don't ever get better. They don't ever get any full remission, meaning that they'll get worse and then symptoms will level off and they'll be fine for a couple years. And then they'll get worse and then they'll get fine. Somebody's calling me via Hangouts, go away. So it'll just constantly progress down. Whereas, so primary progress, so relapsing, remitting, up, down, up, down, but that kind of base level stays the same, right? Primary progressive, roller coaster, straight down, right? That's the downward hill of the roller coaster. Secondary progressive, up, down, until you go straight down. And then progressive relapsing is like flat, drop, flat, drop, flat, drop. Is the way I've always remembered those. There's also benign MS form, right? Benign is just a mild disease where they remain fully functional. They have the plaques, they have the neuronal plaques that you can see on MRIs, they have the increased immunoglobulin in their CSF, but they're normal. We can't explain why they get that way. I've seen x-rays of or MRIs of these people where their whole spine is covered in these neurological plaques. They have no symptoms. Right? So it just goes to show that the way our nervous system works is kind of strange. And then there's Marburg's, which is a rapid progression, leading significant disability or death. This one is very similar to primary progressive, except instead of being a hill down on a roller coaster, it's a cliff. They're like diagnosed with MS, dead. Obviously, that's why it's called malignant. It's the worst type of MS you can get. So here's my friend's brain MRI. Now, I did kind of expand it for the slide so we can kind of explain it, right? But this is weighting it for myelinated nerves. So that means if it's weighted for that, that means dark areas should be myelinated. Unmyelinated areas would be then lit up or whitish, right? And this makes sense because we know the brain, right? Your gray matter is on the outside or the inside of your brain. Outside. Gray matter protects the white matter, right? 50-50, exactly, right? So in the brain, the gray matter, right? It's flip-flopped when you get to the spine. You're exactly right, Erica. So it switches when it gets to the spine. Because all of that central nervous processing, the stuff that lets us live, needs to be highly myelinated to function rapidly, right? Breathing, right? Your pons, all that has to be highly myelinated. Hearing, maybe not so much myelinated. It doesn't have to be as fast for transmission because it's right here. It's right above the area that transmits it, right? Typically, the stuff that's more distal from the areas that's functioning is going to be more myelinated because the signal has to travel farther. So all this stuff in the center of his brain here, black is not going to work on a black screen. So all this stuff in here should be lit up bright white. Or I'm sorry, really dark. It should be black because that's all the myelinated sections. But he's got these white plaques here, right? What those are is those are areas where the myelin is completely and utterly gone. Now, this MRI was about 7 years ago. So I'd like to get a more recent MRI from him if I can. But you can see how, I mean, there's even little plaques in certain areas of the brain that shouldn't be there. And even the desiccation part where you've got that split of the brain where it crosses over is not as myelinated as it should. It's got some demyelinated parts in it. So, whoop, that wasn't what I want to do. There we go. So it definitely shows some problems. What can we do? Well, management, they're going to be given interferon or Avoidance or betaseron. They can help with relapsing or reduction in relapsing rates and reduces the severity of relapses. So they can be given interferon IVs. There's Copaxone is a new drug that they have out for it. They're given immunosuppressants, so they're going to press down their immune system. Why are we going to press down their immune system? Because if we press down their immune system, that means it won't attack the blood-brain barrier, which means it won't attack the myelin. What's the downside to putting them on immunosuppressants? Yeah, now their infection rate's up, right? So let's say it's December, I've got a cold or I've got the flu. And I'm one of those stubborn employees that comes to work with the flu. I wouldn't want to work with a patient with MS because more than likely they're on an immunosuppressant. They are prime COVID candidates, yeah. That's why my friend said he's happy that he's moved to online teaching right now. It's kind of scary. I don't know if I told you the story, but he was diagnosed with MS. His wife was diagnosed with Crohn's, and 2 weeks later, they found out they were pregnant with their first child. Yeah, so they both have autoimmune disorders. So the likelihood of their child having autoimmune disorder is pretty high, right? They both have 2 separate autoimmune disorders. And, you know, it was a rough time for them because they were not sure if they were going to carry the baby, because their thought process was, do we want to put a child to that? I don't know. It was really rough for him. I will say that the little parasite is doing very well. And he likes talking to his Uncle Keith and beating me at Forza Motorsports. He is really good at Forza Motorsports. Well, he is. I mean, kids are parasites. There's no way around it. So how do we know if we're going to have a good response or a bad response? Well, here's the good patients. If it's good, and most of the times, not always. If they're female, if they only have 1 symptom, and they have a complete recovery after exacerbation, and the onset is less than 35. If you have all those in, probably going to have good outcome from MS. Bad outcomes. Disease takes a progressive course. Male, onset after 35. Significant pyramidal and cerebellar signs at 5 years, so problems with pyramidal tracts and the cerebellum. And then high frequency of impact attacks. That's a bad sign. He has a high impact. He has relapsing remitting, but he gets attacks quite frequently, and usually the relapses don't last that long. So what do we focus on? Overaggressive PT can cause exacerbation. This is really important. Just like with ALS, we want to watch how hard we push them. Cardio is good for these patients, but if we push them too hard, it'll flare them, and they'll be out from PT for weeks. Okay, so don't let that happen, especially in a hot room. Treatment's going to be intended to provide symptomatic relief. What type of therapy do you think would be really good for these patients? A therapy that might help cool their body. Yeah, aquatic therapy. Exactly. Great, Erica, right? So aquatic therapy is good as long as we're in a cool pool, right? So like the Jewish Community Center would not be a good idea for a patient with MS because they tend to keep their pool a little bit warmer for the older population. And the air in the pool room is often warmer. But your average pool at most of the Clark County areas is pretty cold. It just is. I kind of miss that we didn't get to do aquatics, and I hope that maybe in 5th semester I can do an aquatics lesson with you guys. That'd be really cool. Literally, get it? Cool in a pool. Because most of the time what happens, everyone gets in the pool and they're like, this is awesome, this is awesome. And about 10 minutes into the thing, people are sitting there shivering. I don't like this anymore, Mr. McKeever. Right. But that actually can help these patients. They have an abnormal response to heat, so the pool can really work well. Focus on restorative and maximizing interventions, right? Treatment does not alter the underlying pathology of the disease, just like most of the other ones. It's going to keep going. Posture counseling is big. Providing assistive devices is big. Safety training and conservation of energy is how we're going to treat MS. Key thing here. So I want to stress this. These are not found as valid treatments, but there's a clinic here in town that says this is a valid treatment for they treat MS this way. And I won't name the clinic. I'm not going to talk about it, but they use this quite frequently. A high polyunsaturated fats diet. It's a way to cure MS. Gluten-free diet. Raw foods diet, including raw meat. Yeah, Proven. That's when we get there. That's the one I always get. Mega vitamin. I've seen this where they say that you're supposed to take 2,000% of your vitamin C dosage, and it cures MS. Right? Herbalife supplements do not cure MS, and they actually got in trouble for saying that. And there was another one of those. Have any of you seen the multi-level marketing companies that try to get you to sell the not the dietary supplements, but the workout stuff? There's all kinds of them out there. There's some that are decent, then there's some. Yeah, Beachbody might be one of them. I forget which one it was, but one of those got in trouble for selling that their pre-workout is a definite reducer in MS symptoms. Now, does that mean that eating a raw food diet, because maybe if you're eating raw vegetables, you know, maybe you become a vegan, as long as you're still taking your protein? Does that mean that if you had a crappy diet before and now you're eating healthier, that you're not going to respond better? No, absolutely. Right? If you eat better, you're healthier, period. It doesn't cure the MS. It just means that you're not putting crap in your body. Right? It's, you know, if you went from, yeah. But I'm just saying is if you went from a diet of eating here's polyunsaturated fats. If you went from a diet of eating polysaturated fats to polyunsaturated fats, I don't doubt that you'd probably feel a little bit better. That doesn't mean that it's curing your MS, right? Hyperbaric oxygen treatment, so flooding the body with oxygen. Our president is excellent example of this. One of the things he received was steroids and hyperbaric oxygen treatments, and suddenly he feels a ton better. Well, that makes sense. You just flooded your body with oxygen. You basically gave your body an oxygen high, right? Proven, yeah, that I'm just gonna leave that there. Snake venom, specifically of the fleur-de-lis snake was the big one I saw that treats this, or fleur-de-lance, a really bad snake. No, just don't pro-venom. Venom has shown though, they have some really positive things with venom treating certain neurological disorders. This isn't one of them. And also, you shouldn't be buying snake venom from, like, I don't know, a corner animal shop or something like that. eBay. Yeah, exactly. Vertebral arterial manipulation. I'm just going to put my head in hands for this one. Yeah, Silk Road, exactly. If that even, we're not going to go on the deep web and buy some snake venom. So, vertebral arterial manipulation. Does anyone know what this is? This is a chiropractor thing where they say, well, when I'm pushing down your back and I'm popping your back, what I'm really doing is stretching out those vertebral arteries. And because I'm stretching out those vertebral arteries, I'm curing your disease. I'm going to have you lean over a ball, and when you're leaning over the ball, I'm going to be pushing on your chest to stretch out your vertebral arteries. Yeah, I'm just going to shake my head and move on from that. That's just like the one chiropractor in town that says by adjusting your back, they can make you lose weight. That'd be great. Myasthenia gravis. Exactly, right, Erica? Why haven't I done this already? Myasthenia gravis is one of the lower affecting diseases, and this is one I kind of chuckle at again, I said, because I've only seen one. Have any of you seen somebody with myasthenia gravis? Because I'm curious. I'm now at 4 cohorts, and I haven't seen a single person with myasthenia gravis. Let's see if we can break that trend. Does anyone know? Never heard of it? Good. Here we are again. The last cohort that I had somebody would have been 4 cohorts ago. That's been 6. And it was only because they had a family member that experienced it. Yeah, so I'm now at 5 cohorts without it. That haven't even encountered somebody with it, right? So again, this is just one of those that the boards for some reason thinks is an important thing for you guys to know, and mainly because of the myasthenic crisis. So what do you need to know about myasthenia gravis? It is, again, it's primarily genetic predisposition. It is an acquired immunoprotein malfunction from mother to fetus. This is weird. This is one of the things you do need to know, is that it is caused by the immunoprotein, lipoprotein-related protein 4. I don't know why that's really specific like that, but I know that I've seen several questions, or heard of people having several questions on this. Don't freak out about this. If it's asking about myasthenia gravis, go down and look for the weirdest answer. Lipoprotein-related protein 4 is the immunoprotein that it's going to have. It'll have stuff like dystrophin, which is involved in muscular dystrophy, right? It'll have what other ones it'll have the ones that are affected in ALS, and it'll have the ones that are affected maybe in, it'll say dopamine, and then it'll have lipoprotein related protein 4. That's what causes it. Yes, it's an immunoprotein problem. It does not allow the body to fully process proteins. Does that make sense? Lipoprotein, protein related 4. So it's mainly the fatty proteins. Very similar, Erica, very similar to PKU. It doesn't respond the same, but very similar idea. How's that? The main organ that gets affected is the thymus. Where is your thymus at? Nope, sternum. Yeah, there we go. Throat. Which ones are up in the throat here? Your lymph nodes up here. Your thymus sits right about here. Right? It's right behind your sternum. So chronic autoimmune disease, we talked about already. Myasthenia gravis means grave muscle wasting. Sounds bad. Good news is it's not as bad as it seems. Right? It's not going to be a thoroughly, it's in the head, by the way. I wasn't gonna comment on that. You're thinking of your thyroid. The name sounds bad, but they often live normal lifespans. So the problem is in acetylcholine, right? ACH. The ACH goes out of whack. There are normal levels of dopamine, but because ACH goes out of whack, the dopamine's not there to kind of counteract the ACH. Does that make sense? Because dopamine doesn't spike up with ACH. Also, the reuptake inhibitors are blocked at the postsynaptic cleft. And there it is, lipoprotein, protein related 4, right? Or lipoprotein related protein 4. Do you guys remember what happens, what it means when a neurotransmitter is reuptaked? Do you remember that from anatomy? Would you benefit from kind of a refresher on that, or do you guys understand that, what that means? So Erica says yes, kind of ... Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure, because this is one it kind of plays into depression too. So remember, we've got a nerve that comes out here. We've got the bulb end of the nerve, and then we've got the other nerve over here, right? So the signals are traveling down this nerve. What is this area here called? Between the nerves? Right, that's the synaptic cleft. Good. So I'm going to erase my little drawings there. So let's say we're talking about with the ACH. So we have all our little ACH molecules in here helping the transmission of that signal, right? In each of these nerve endings, we have uptake channels. And they're usually going to be the opposite charge of whatever the neurotransmitter is. And what their job is to manage how much of that specific neurotransmitter is in that synaptic cleft. So if they see there's too much ACH, they're going to turn on and they'll suck some of that ACH out, right? So they go, okay, we got too much. So this one will turn on and suck some of that ACH out. And now they're like, okay, now we're just right. Yes, it would eat it again. Exactly. That's actually a really good way of thinking of it, Erica, right? So now what happens when you have the problem with this, that the receptors aren't receiving it, is that, there it is. For whatever reason, there's little blocks on some of these uptake. And so now only maybe 1 or 2 of them work. And so now, unfortunately, you're ending up with a ton of ACH here. Bam, 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 bam. It's just filling up that cleft. And nothing to kind of absorb it. That's what it's called when you get a reuptake inhibitor, right? So there's a specific chemical that's going to trigger those uptakes to actually turn on and turn off. That is missing in these patients, right? So like we're going to use this as an idea. So let me draw another one here. All right, so I want to make it a little bit bigger. Mr. McKeever is not an artiste, that is for sure. So serotonin is a big one you hear about, right? Serotonin's involved in depression. So let's say we get a bunch of serotonin floating here. I don't think it's negative. I don't use that charge anyway, right? Serotonin is going to have a specific door that it can go back into to get eaten. Sometimes those doors eat too much, right? So they're like, I'm hungry. Nom, 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 nom. Oh, they ate the whole nerve there. And fix my nerve. So now they ate all of the serotonin and there's only one in there. What's likely to happen to that patient? They're likely to get depressed because they have too little serotonin. So if you take an SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, what'll happen is that drug will go in and put blocks over a couple of these uptakes. So now it's more likely you'll have more serotonin in that neurosynaptic cleft. So then you get happy again, right? And then you don't kill people because happy people don't kill people. Does that make sense to everyone? Unless you're the Joker, right? Okay, cool. Does anyone have any questions on that? Because that is something that you'll occasionally get a question on your boards, is understanding what an uptake is with neurotransmitters. So I know that Dr. Johnson covered it, but I think sometimes he covers it at like 1,000-foot level. So I just wanted to make sure that you kind of understood it. So with this disease, not only is there too much acetylcholine, but then the eaters of the acetylcholine aren't eating, they're full, right? They decide, nah, brah, I had enough, right? They don't want any more chicken nuggets or chicken nuggies. So what happens? Well, here's the interesting thing. The first sign of it usually is weakness of the eye muscles. So unfortunately, they often misdiagnose this patient as having MS. So they'll treat them for MS for a long period of time and get no responses. Because some doctors will go, well, it's first sign of MS, so I'm just going to throw you on immunosuppressants. Immunosuppressants help a little bit with this, but not too much. Dysphagia is common, Broca's dysphagia. So what is Broca's aphasia? Do you remember the different types of aphasia, Broca's and Wernicke's? One is broken aphasia, broken speech. Broca is broken. The other is fluent aphasia or receptive aphasia, Wernicke's aphasia. So these patients have problems getting words out, right? Dysarthria is a problem with the joint muscles in the jaw, Dysphonia. I've seen it both ways with myasthenia gravis, where people get really quiet, or something that's really quiet gets really loud, and they don't realize it. They have a problem managing their voice quality and volume. Dysphagia. So one of the key things here to remember, your dys's or your A's, when you see dysphagia with an S, it is speech. When you see dysphagia with a G, I want you to think gut, because this is with eating. That's the way I remember it. Dysphagia with an S, speech. Dysphagia with a G, gut. It has to do with eating. And I think I'm getting Broca's aphasia. And a dyspraxia of mastication. So they're having problems with the planning of chewing. Hypomimia. What was that again? We're going to see that a couple times here. What's hypomimia? Lowomimia. I love you guys. I really do. Erica's great. Flat affect. Minimal change of expression. You're exactly right, Jaira. That's the person, right? So when you see hypomimia, I think one of you had mentioned, think of the teacher from Bueller's or Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He had a very flat affect. Think him. Right? General weakness and malaise. Malaise is what I'm feeling right now. I just feel like crap. Balance disturbances. Oh, another dys. What is dyspnea? dyspnea. Difficulty breathing, good. They get what's called cowboy gait because their balance is off, so they start walking really wide. They get that wide stance. When you think cowboy gait, think, yeah, John Wayne gait. Think of the way that kids walk, right? When they have a diaper on, that's kind of the gait they get. Cervicalgia, thoracalgia, and lumbalgia. All that means is what? Cervicalgia, thoracalgia, and lumbalgia just means pain in the spine. Yeah, pain in the spine. So here's the thymus again. It sits anterior to the heart, behind the sternum. Starts out really large as a baby, right? And then it grows a little bit in adolescence, and then as we get older, it shrinks. There's some theories behind this, thinking that maybe this is why as we get older, we're more susceptible to disease too, because that is it's responsible for our lymphatic systems. It's gradually replaced by adipose tissue, but in myasthenia gravis, it just keeps growing. There's a problem with that. There's only so much space behind the sternum, so it can impinge on other problems. They get what's called lymphoid hyperplasia, which is swelling of that lymphatic tissue, and may get a thymoma, where they get a growth. So what do? They do a thymectomy, where they go in and physically remove the thymus, right? Or at least remove part of the thymus. We can live without it. So they'll go in and remove that. That will help some of the symptoms of myasthenia gravis. This is the key thing for your boards, is the myasthenic crisis. Myasthenic crisis is a life-threatening problem associated with myasthenia gravis. The respiratory muscles become compromised and literally shut off. So oftentimes your diaphragm will become paralyzed, and then all the accessory muscles will not expand. At that point, your patient is going to go hypoxic, right? They're going to try to breathe, and they say they can't. It requires immediate ventilator response in order to actually survive. A lot of times these patients are going to have to be bagged and tagged the whole way into the hospital, meaning that they're going to have constant pressure, somebody constantly pumping oxygen into their lungs the whole time into the hospital until they can get them on a ventilator, right? This is often triggered by bacterial viral infections, and our buddy HSV1 comes back to visit us here. Fever, or sometimes it's just an adverse reaction to medications. I've seen it where they're taking a specific medication because they've had a thymectomy to reduce the chance of infection, and they respond poorly to it, and they get a myasthenic crisis. Here's the key thing about this. If they're talking, they're going to say, your boards are going to say, you have a patient with myasthenia gravis that starts experiencing, what would your patient look like if they're going into a myasthenic crisis? What would they start complaining of? It's going to start with dyspnea, right? It's going to start with that, shortness of breath. But they already have dyspnea, so you got to be, was it a really myasthenic crisis, or is it just their normal shortness of breath, right? Yeah, they're going to start complaining about chest pain, super dyspnea. I like that. Coin that one too. They're going to start complaining of a little chest pain, and they're going to say it's getting harder to breathe. And then you're going to start seeing hypoxic signs. Where can you see hypoxic signs at? Face. Yep. Specifically the lips and the gums, right? And then the fingers behind the nail beds. They'll start turning blue. At that point, it doesn't matter if this is a myasthenic crisis or if this is any other crisis, if this is a blood clot in the lungs. What is going to be our position? What should we do? Should we go tell the PT? Yeah, 911. If we're in the hospital, what should we do? Call a code. Yep. Right, and whatever color, they're usually not, so here's the deal, they're usually not going to totally get on you about the colors of the codes, Renee, in your boards. It'll just be one of your answers will be call a code. In this case, doesn't matter if it's myasthenia gravis or whether it's a lung clot. Just call a code. Here's all the treatments. We have immunosuppressants, we have anticholinesterase agents, meaning tamp down that ACH. They do thymectomy, plasmapheresis, high-dose IVIG, intravenous immunoglobulin, more than high dose as possible. Again, that's going to be managed by the doc. All of these all of these medications are going to mess with their immune system. If they mess with their immune system, we've got to be careful being around them, right? So they may be a question on your boards is talking about your patient is on azathrapine, and it may be myasthenia gravis, it may be lupus, it may be MS, and says, currently you are experiencing a cold. You should go down to your answers on your board and say, don't treat that patient. Does that make sense? Or usually it's not going to say azathrapine. It'll say your patient's on immunosuppressants. They're not going to require you to know azathrapine, but the most common are those three there: prednisone, azathrapine, and Cellcept. Those are all three of the most common. Azathrapine and Cellcept are also organ rejection drugs. So what are we going to do? Help with mobility, gait, and safety. We looked at that before. Maximize ADLs and IADLs. These patients are going to end up with contractures eventually just because of the way the disease progresses. We need to stretch them. Work with breathing, coughing, huffing training. Oh God, where did you just learn that? You had a whole comp on it, right? One of the things that I know Dr. Vress can talk to you guys briefly about, I know that she teaches you guys doing huffing before coughing, depending upon what your patient's conditions are. Sometimes, and actually most of the time that I do it, I do coughing before I do huffing. And the reason for that is coughing clears the lower parts of the lungs, whereas huffing is an upper respiratory motion. So if I get them to and get that gunk up here into the upper chest, and then I have them, I can get that gunk out. Right? So depending upon your clinic, they may do it that way. There's nothing wrong with doing it the other way either. It's just that everywhere I've worked, I do coughing before I do huffing. And we never huff paint. Medications may have side effects, patient family education, safety training, conservation of energy, all that normal stuff we talked about. The other one we will talk about with these patients is and same thing with Parkinson's, assisting in psychological adjustments. Helping them adjust to their new normal is really big. Because these patients hear myasthenia gravis, oh my God, I'm gonna die. It says grave in it. No, you're fine. You're gonna have these problems. How's that problem gonna affect you? And blah, 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 and we gotta work through it. Last one for the day, Parkinson's. And this is probably the shakiest topic we're gonna talk about today. All right, I got a few jokes, right? I had a patient once that had Parkinson's, and he said that he'd be the ideal bartender for James Bond. Why would he be the ideal bartender for James Bond? Does anyone know? Yep, because James Bond likes his martini shaken, not stirred. And I about died when he said that, because at least this old man was like, I'm going to have fun with my disease, right? Right. He was like, I can't help it. I'm going to have fun with this disease. This is a disease of Caucasians, just to let you know, and of men. It is 2% and growing of populations over 65. There are some projections that by the time we're in 2030, 2040, it may be 40% of the population over 65. And I'll talk about my thought process on that as well, right? It's very rare for it to get young onset Parkinson's, but it does happen. I don't know why that's on there. That is not right. Scratch that. Nah, it never happens. I don't know why that's on there. I have to fix that. Just like I have to fix the name. So that's not part of it. I think I copied that from another section and didn't delete it. There is a huge growing link between TBIs. What are TBIs again? Good question. Traumatic brain injury. Thank you. Yeah. So Renee asks, does this apply to Middle Easterners? Yeah, because technically the descent of somebody from the Middle East is from the Caucasus Mountain. So it is higher in that area. But there's some signs that show that diet plays heavily into that you don't get as much of it in the Middle East because diet's a little different. So yay, I guess. right? Because there is a lot of ties to diet and Parkinson's. So it is a progressive neuromuscular disorder causing death or impairment of the substantia nigra, right? Substantia nigra is part of the mesencephalon, which is part of the basal ganglia is part of, helps regulate movement. It's Latin for black substance. As Parkinson's progresses, it loses its black color. The substance that causes that blackness is melanin, right? We know melanin causes color. Melanin is an inert byproduct of the creation. So dopamine is made in the substantia nigra. The side product that's made is melanin, right? Which is also common if you look at patients that have Parkinson's, a lot of times their skin becomes parchment-like. It becomes kind of pale and they're pale out a little bit, right? Kind of like our president looks without his orange on. Decreased dopamine causes the decrease of inhibition of excitable chemicals, which means they end up with akesthesia, that restlessness feeling. So the two main parts of the basal ganglia are inhibitory and excitatory. So we inhibit movement, we cause movement, or the basal ganglia's point. So dopamine gets decreased, which means acetylcholine is too much, which means it looks very similar to what somebody might look with myasthenia gravis, right? So you can't counter the ACH. So you end up with decreased movement because of Parkinson's, and it's not due to weakness of the muscles, but because the muscles are overactive. So if your muscles are constantly moving and you're unstable, you're less likely to move. It can cause a patient to become akinesthetic, meaning they stop moving or get rigidity. And then eventually the muscles get so tired, they get bradykinesia, slow movement. There are also some other problems with serotonin and norepinephrine get kind of reduced as well because of this. And that makes sense because dopamine is, that hit that makes you happy. Serotonin and norepinephrine are both work in with that. And so depression comes along with this pretty heavily. The tremor is one of the most common. We're going to talk about that, but it's widely viewed as a phenomenon of the loss of that inhibitory chemical, right? So we're going to talk about a couple different types. The main thing we're going to talk about here is we're going to talk about how free radicals affect things. Free radicals are unstable and potentially dangerous damaging molecules generated by normal chemical reactions in the body. One of the biggest free radicals in the body is oxygen, which is why a lot of times you'll hear people saying, I'm taking antioxidants. Have you ever heard or saw that on any vitamins or stuff like that? Antioxidant flavor, right? Antioxidants are nothing more than vitamins, right? So you don't necessarily need to supplement your antioxidants unless you're not eating healthy. One of the super fruits. Does anyone know what the big super fruit is for antioxidants? Pomegranate's one of them. I didn't think about that. Yeah. Berries. Berries are one of the common ones. A lot of the berries, specifically blueberries, seem to. Tomatoes too, yeah. And tomatoes also have the renin. There's one for vision as well. I forget what that one's called off the top of my head right now. But berries are really common, like especially blueberries. Hawthorn berries have shown some signs of it. Hawthorn berries aren't very tasty though, and they do have some poison in them, so don't go always eating them. Probably not a good thing. So we're going to talk about the different types. So the 4 types, you have primary or idiopathic Parkinson's, or what we traditionally call Parkinson's disease. We have secondary or sequelae Parkinson's. We have Parkinsonism, and then we have Parkinson's plus. The main one you guys are going to deal with is Parkinson's disease. The good news is the patients for all 4 of these conditions look exactly the same. Symptoms and signs all look the same. The difference is what causes it. Primary or idiopathic is just a breakdown of that substantia nigra. Secondary or sequelae is caused by some other problem, right? Whenever we talk about a sequelae condition, something else is causing it. Viruses, toxins, drugs, stuff like that. Parkinsonism is where the symptoms mimic Parkinson's, but it's caused by other neurodegenerative problems. And we'll talk about Parkinson's plus in a few seconds here. So idiopathic, most common form. It is possibly a problem with the acceleration of the aging process. It usually starts off with a slow, progressive, long subclinical period, meaning the patient may have only a small tremor for years, and it may last up to 5-10 years. I've seen it. And then all of a sudden, Parkinson's goes into a hyperdrive and just a downhill slope after that. The most common problems is postural instability and gait disturbances, right? And then tremors. And we're going to talk about the specific type of tremors for this versus MS. So sequelae Parkinson's. Sequelae Parkinson's is caused by other problems. It could be a viral insult. The influenza epidemics with encephalitis lethargica of 1917 and 1926, dealing with, you know, that specific, the influenza flu of 1917, 1926, caused a large number of viral-related Parkinson's patients. Parkinson's showed up decades later and gave rise to a theory of a slow-growing virus infection that causes substantia nigra breakdown. So we're still looking at, maybe does idiopathic Parkinson's stem from a viral insult younger in age? We don't know. Because we haven't had a reoccurrence of that influenza, the viral sequelae Parkinson's is actually going down. But again, guess what we're worried about causing a new form of Parkinson's? COVID. So, and we won't know this for decades at this point, if patients that have COVID end up with a separate form of Parkinson's later in life. So this is kind of sad. Toxins, manganese, carbon disulfide, carbon monoxide, cyanide, and methanol can lead to Parkinson's disease. Interesting thing, synthetic heroin containing MPTP, methylphenol tetrahydropropylene, because you all need to know that. What you have to know is synthetic heroin causes destruction of dopamine, right? So that means that's a really, because it's really common for them to ask you a question, which of the following can lead to sequelae or secondary Parkinson's? And if you go down, one of them will be synthetic heroin. Find synthetic heroin, answer it, move on. Oxygen is not going to cause it. That's going to cause primary Parkinson's. It won't be something like, not too many medications, like you don't get it from antibiotics, stuff like that. There are specific medications that can cause it, like, you know, high dose lead medications and stuff like that, or something with powerful tranquilizers, Haldol, Pridol, right, stuff like that. Certain antidepressant drugs, long-term amitriptyline can cause it, antihypertensive drugs. So there are drugs that can cause it, but your average ordinary drugs probably not. Interesting, if you stop using the drugs or remove yourself from the toxin, oftentimes your Parkinson's gets better. So that's a good sign. Synthetic heroin is probably the one that's the downside. If you take it for a long period of time, it doesn't go away. So Parkinsonism, right? This is a disease that results from severe, frequent TBIs. It's also associated with dementia. We found out now it's not necessarily the severity of the TBI, it's the frequency of the TBI that can lead to chronic traumatic encephalopathy. So it leads to people whose professions put them at increased risk of blows to the head: boxers, football players, soccer players, professional martial artists, MMA, hockey, right? We're going to talk about this with TBI, and I hope by the time we're done talking about it with TBIs, all of you are upset at the association for the NHL, because that is a scumbag organization. I love it, hockey, but the organization that runs it is something else. What do all these pitchers have in common here? Does anyone know? They're all boys, okay? But we've shown that Parkinson's has a high male dominance. All these people are dead. All of these people died from TBIs of some sort. Yeah. You know, so we've got Junior Seau down here, right? Junior Seau is a sad case because does anyone know what happened to him? Because he played for the Patriots and got his Super Bowl, right? Yeah, he killed himself. How did he kill himself, though? Does anyone know? Because to me, that's the saddest case about him. Yeah, he shot himself in the chest so his brain could be looked at. Because he knew his brain was messed up. Right? 81, Aaron Hernandez, right? He was the guy that killed his girlfriend. And right, he was hearing voices. He had all kinds of problems. It is in the documentary, yeah. This guy over here is the guy that led to, he hung himself. You're exactly right. Or what, hung himself. We'll just go with that. This guy over here, the player for the Steelers, and Mike Walker is his name. There we go. He's the one that led the doctor to actually start researching TBIs and led to the movie Concussion. If you haven't seen it, it's actually a fantastic movie, and we'll actually save it because we may do that as an extra credit opportunity. This is Steve Montador, and I'll talk about his buddy Daniel Carcillo in a little bit when we talk about, it was with Will Smith. We'll talk about Daniel Carcillo and his drive for the NHL to get head injuries responded to because of his buddy Steve Montador. Both of them played for the Stanley Cup teams for the Blackhawks. And when you talk to Danny Carcillo, he barely remembers any of his games. This guy over here, you should know, right? Who's that? Yeah, Ali, right? Quite possibly the greatest athlete ever. And then, of course, we got an MMA fighter up here. I forgot who he is. Two more NHL guys. Both these two over here, they played together, and both of them were dead by 43. It is sad, right? It's going to get more sad when we talk about the TBIs. Parkinson's plus syndrome is a neurological disease that can affect the substantia nigra and produce Parkinson's symptoms. But again, usually in this case, it'd be something like MS causing the Parkinson's plus syndrome, right? So they have a disease plus Parkinson's is what Parkinson's plus happens. Hyperparathyroidism, hypothyroidism, and Wilson's disease are primarily the ones that cause this Parkinson's plus syndrome. The downside to this is when it's a disease that's causing the substantia nigra to stop producing that, they don't respond to the drugs. So nothing helps these patients at all. Signs and symptoms. Paralysis agitans is the most common symptom. It's a shaking palsy. So they get tremors. The resting tremor is the most common. So Parkinson's, I want you guys to remember this. Parkinson's is resting tremor. MS, intention tremor. The difference, resting tremor is when I sit here and I just have a tremor just sitting here, right? Intention tremor is when I reach for stuff, and because I'm reaching, I get a tremor, okay? Pill rolling is probably the most common sign. It's just this type of a tremor, and they don't even realize they're doing it. And it will become increased during emotional stress and fatigue. Bradykinesia or slow movement is probably the most debilitating of their symptoms. Rigidity is common, both cogwheel and lead pipe. Cogwheel is very ratchety type motion where you move them through, whereas lead pipe, they just don't move. They're just locked in place and you cannot get them to move with the rigidity. Micrographia is a common symptom of Parkinson's. It's also a common symptom of multiple personality disorder, and we agree with that. Hypokinesia to the point where they stop moving, akinesia, and the patient may freeze. Speech disorders, pretty much all of them happen with patients with Parkinson's. They get a specific one called Hypokinetic Dysphagia, where they have slow swallowing or slow velocity of swallowing. Could that cause problems? So some of you occasionally will get hypokinetic dysphagia. I'm sure you've experienced it, where you take a swallow of something and you just feel it inching down your throat. Yeah, and it hurts, right? It's uncomfortable. That's a hypokinetic dysphagia problem. Sometimes it just happens because, right, sometimes it just happens because your throat just isn't ready for it. And it's not, doesn't know what to do, or maybe it's shut down because it's getting ready for breathing or something to that effect, right? With these patients, it's constant. Oftentimes this, because of all these speech disorders and swallowing disorders, it'll lead the patient to be selectively mute. That means they'll choose not to speak anymore. They get Flexion Dystonia. Right, yeah, it's right, Erica. It's sad if that happens. They have Flexion Dystonia, where they actually start moving into a flexed posture. They get Festination of gait, right? So festination of gait is not the freezing part. The festination of gait is their feet are literally moving like this. Just up and down, up and down, up and down. But the Uncle Professor, right? The problem with that festination of gait is they don't get anywhere, right? That is because ACH is out of whack, right? So rather than taking big, long steps, they take these itsy bitsy baby steps. In their mind, they're taking big steps. It's really common for you to say, okay, take a big step, and the patient to say, I am. It's really sad because to their mind, they're taking big steps, but to you, they're taking baby steps. Baby steps, Bob, baby steps. They usually have lack of reciprocal arm swing. They have anteropropulsive and retropropulsive gait patterns, and they will freeze at changes in floor patterns. Anteropropulsive means when they're walking, they start going way forward. That means retropropulsive means what? Which way are they going to go? Backwards, right? And we know as adults, we have counter thoughts to going forward. So a lot of times when you're leaning forward, you have protection against that. But if somebody goes retropropulsive, we're not as good at that anymore. We're not kids anymore. So we don't know how to react to that. And a lot of times that leads to falls. Fatigue, obviously. Think about it. If my feet are moving like this, am I going to be tired? My feet are moving 1,000,000 miles a minute. Plus, I'm sitting there when I'm at rest, and my hands are moving, my arms are moving, I have a tremor going on. I'll be constantly tired. Cardiovascular abnormalities common, impaired sensation, and then this will lead to poverty of movement, meaning they'll stop moving. Because they can't feel, they don't want to move. Because they can't speak, they stop speaking. Cognitive changes and hypomimia are common. Dementia happens in about 40% of the case, 20 to 40%. Bradyphrenia is common, slow thought process. Short-term memory deficits happen, depression, apathy, right? Just lack of care, passivity, loss of ambition, and enthusiasm, dependency are really common. They'll often have disturbances of sleep and appetite because that resting tremor doesn't stop when you go to bed. And so then they'll end up with a dysthymic disorder, and they'll just end up with a wide range so that everything in the brain just kind of gets out of the way. They'll have anxiety and phobias. They'll also end up seeing things a lot of times, right? Parkinson's patients will see and hear people all the time. I think there's a commercial out right now about that where the guy like sees his dog split into like 6 different dogs. That's a really common Parkinson's symptom. It's really common for them to also have anxiety that leads to them seeing things that aren't there, like their significant other having affairs. You know, the significant other can be sitting there watching Jeopardy, and what they see is the significant other's having an affair. And that can lead to all kinds of problems, obviously. So no cure right now for Parkinson's. There are medications that we can give them, but the medications have a honeymoon period, meaning there's a period that they work really well, and then just like any other wedding, it eventually dies. I'm just joking. I'm kidding. That was a joke. That was a joke. Doesn't happen in every marriage, just most of them. No, I'm just joking again. I am not anti-marriage. So literally the drugs work really well at first and then slowly but surely stop working. L-DOPA was the gold standard treatment, levodopa. It's a synthetic precursor to dopamine that causes the brain to create dopamine. Carbidopa is a synthetic dopamine reuptake inhibitor that keeps the dopamine in the postsynaptic cleft. And then we have the new one, which is Sinemet. Sinemet is L-DOPA and carbidopa combined into one medication. That like makes sense to me, right? I don't know why we didn't come up with this before. Well, they were waiting to get a patent on it, right? That's why. So patients before were taking L-DOPA and carbidopa separately. Now we've got one pill. They can do dopamine agonists to cause dopamine to boost up in the blood system. We can give anti-ACH meds to slow down acetylcholine. MAOIs and MAOBs are out there as well. And then drugs to treat their anxiety and depression. That was the primary way of treating this. Their management will used to be to focus on slowing disease progression, right? High protein diets on people with Parkinson's can block the effects of L-DOPA and dopamine, right? So they recommend a high calorie, low protein diet. Also increasing fiber and water intake to overcome the side effects of medication, because most of the drugs are going to cause both constipation and frequent urination. So they do require an adequate nutritionist. The two main tests we use are the HONE-YAR and the Unified Parkinson's Disability Rating Scale, or the UPDRS. If you work in a clinic that does Parkinson's patients, you'll get familiar with this. It's just a test of their common symptoms. It'll ask about their, their pill rolling. It'll ask about their freezing of movements. And it's just basically a test to get on and see how severe their Parkinson's is, which helps us determine how much they need help with. SLP can help with their speech problems. The new kind of gold standard going forward is brain stimulation. So it's amazing. I'll post a couple of videos to this because it's amazing how much DBS actually helps these patients. So what we're now looking at is if we can catch Parkinson's early enough and we can implant a deep brain stimulator into the substantia nigra, we can use that stimulator to kind of shock the substantia nigra to create more dopamine. And for a period of time while that substantia nigra is patent and functional, that patient will be completely and utterly normal. And it's really wild to see on some of the videos where the patient will become just literally shaking there in full tremors. They turn on the DBS, the patient stands up straight. Or they'll just have these worse, like there's one of the videos, I have the patient's tremor is like this. And they turn the DBS and they're turning it up, they're turning it up, they're turning it up and turning up, and all of a sudden his tremor is gone. Yeah, right? So wild. Sound like I'm Joe Rogan, man. So wild. Whoa, did you hear about elk meat? Jamie, pull that up. Yeah, man. Elk meat helps with Parkinson's. Anyway. So what we're now looking at is, well, can we do DBS early? Because eventually the substantia nigra is going to fail. It sounds just like, I don't know if that's a compliment or what it is. And the sad part is some of you guys know who Joe Rogan is. That's even worse, I think. Whoa. Anyway, so if we can do DBS early, what we can do, yeah, DMT, man, is we can put off giving patients the actual medications for Parkinson's, which means maybe if we catch it when they're 55, we get the deep brain stimulator put in, and these things can last about 10 to 12 years. So now at 55, I get the DBS put in. And so now I get, say I get 10 years out of it. Now I'm 65. Now I can start the medications. The medications can last 5 to 10 years. So now I can get up to 75. And so it's not till later in life that I actually start experiencing the really, really bad symptoms from this. That is a huge move forward in Parkinson's, right? Unfortunately, in the case like Junior Seau. Junior Seau finished football. I think he was 35 when he finished football. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure he was 35. 1 year out of football, he was having full-blown Parkinson's symptoms. Like full-blown advanced, he did kill himself, right? Full-blown advanced Parkinson's syndromes. Right? So that's how bad these TBIs can cause that Parkinsonism. Neuroablative surgery. We can actually go in and do burns of different parts of the brain and surgically lesion off parts of the brain to allow Parkinson's to be lessened. Again, the problem with that, anytime that we burn off a nerve, it typically doesn't grow back. Or if it does grow back, it grows back with a vengeance, right? We can do ablative surgery on the nerves that cause pain in the arm too. But a lot of times when that ablative surgery kind of wears off and the nerve starts growing back, that pain comes back more angry. So same problem here is we're seeing that patients get neuroablative surgery. It helps them quite a bit when they have that surgery, but then their Parkinson's comes back with a vengeance. One of the other exciting ones is neurofetal tissue transplantation. It's experimental, but they found that sometimes injecting stem cells into the substantia nigra can trigger new growth in the substantia nigra and actually relieve Parkinson's symptoms. The downside to it is the current administration, this research has been halted because pretty much all research with fetal tissue has now been halted because we're killing babies to get it, but that's not where most of the fetal tissue comes from. That's beside the point. I don't want to get into that political discussion, right? But fetal tissue, you know, can really provide things. There's a big market right now for, you know, when you have a baby for what's called cord banking, right? Where, you know, you bank the placenta and the cord as much as it is possible. Kelly says she did it, right? And there's some really important things because that is the baby's kind of native tissue. So that if later in life, maybe, I'm not using your child as an example here, I'm just saying, maybe if the mother, later in life, the child starts having some problems, there's that fetal tissue there that they can fall back on and maybe do some stuff like this with neurofetal tissue implant. And it can help override some of those problems. It's really wild, some of the stuff we're looking at. Can also bank baby teeth. Interesting. I did not know that. That's actually kind of wild. I'm predicting eventually we might actually have sometimes where we're starting to bank marrow as well. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it kind of makes sense to me that maybe down the line we'll have a marrow bank where you can go bank your marrow and save it for a time you might need it. That's what the baby teeth. Okay, that makes sense. That actually does make sense. I didn't really think about it for baby teeth, but that makes complete sense because they're really soft and mostly marrow. Whoa, deep tea. What do we do? Well, this is what the PT is going to look at. So I broke this down to what the PT is going to look at. PT eval for Parkinson's is intensive. They have to do a lot of stuff, which is why a lot of times the PT eval for a Parkinson's patient can be spread over 3 days. Because the Parkinson's patient, like the MS patient, you know, like the ALS patient, if you do too much with them, it will flare them. They won't come back. So the PT eval is going to be delayed. We may not be able to treat them until the 4th treatment. Right? We may be involved in the PT eval, but we're not going to be doing treatment at that point. So there's all these tests, they can run them through it. What we're looking at is treating the secondary impairment. So again, symptomatic. We're going to focus heavily on the early stages. If we can get them in the early stages, we can delay or minimize the disability, right? Institute exercises early as possible. A short, concise exercise program is best because if we can compress the exercise program, make it as effective and as short as possible, it doesn't lead them to fatigue. We used to think these patients can't do cardiovascular training, that we can't do anything really stressful to them. You know, our exercise programs used to be chair exercises and stuff like that with them. Dr. Landers at UNLV did an interesting research on this, where he ran patients through a basic Parkinson's program and put another group of patients through an aggressive cardio program that was short and intense. And what he found was the patients that did those short, intense cardio programs got better faster than the people with traditional PT. So we know that they're not necessarily negatively affected by cardio, but if they have gait problems and gait disturbances and everything else like that, it may be more difficult to treat these patients. Relaxation exercises are common. PNF, rhythmic initiation, slow reversals, alternating isos, and rhythmic stave are all common with these patients. Hook lying with counter rotation of the pelvis and the shoulder girdles helps out with overall calming of the actual tremors in that. We found that out because it kind of stretches the nerves out. Cognitive and meditation techniques are good. Deep breathing, rocking in a chair, stress management, balance training. The main thing with these patients is external cueing is huge. Their internal cues are off. So we need to provide them with external cueing. Verbal cueing can be great, but I found music works fantastic with patients with Parkinson's. And when I say music, I'm talking about a music with a steady beat, right? Slipknot may not be the best idea for a patient with Parkinson's, right? The beat's a little too fast for them. But But something with the simple 1-2 beat is really good because it gets them to stay in tune with the beat, right? It's amazing. There's a whole study done by a lady, I want to say she was at Ranchos Los Amigos, that did one where she had the patient walk and then she put headphones on the patient, had them walk and had them listen to music, and how much a difference it was walking with the headphones on. It's just wild the way it is. Clapping, creating a constant sound for them, metronomes, giving them floor marks. I like to put my foot out in front of them and say, step on my foot, step on my foot, step on my foot, so they have a visual cue where they need to go. Mirror therapy is big. And then obstacles, helping them kind of clear that feet. With Parkinson's patients, they're going to get their big movements. Yep, that was, I think that was in here, wasn't it? Large amplitude movements. Yeah, back here on the eval, teaching them to do large amplitude movements. With Parkinson's, and with all of these, I'm going to actually go out of the PowerPoint here. With all of these diseases, the medications are typically going to be morning medications, right? I had to figure out where it was too, don't feel bad. So all of these medications are typically going to be morning medications. What does that mean? That means their function level is going to be better in the morning. Almost all of the medications, whether it's for MS, Myasthenia Gravis, Parkinson's, patients are going to take it in the morning. So that means within about 90 minutes of that, the medication is starting to kick in. So if you have a patient in the hospital that's Parkinson's, they should be seen before noon, unless we want to see how bad their effect is later in the day. This is where your case management kind of comes into play as a clinician, because you need to be looking at your caseload. You know, when you get your patients, you're going to see most hospitals, I mean, all the hospitals I've been in give out little cards with the patient's information on it. So we know you're going to see these patients, you're going to see that patients, or maybe the electronic health record will assign patients to you. You need to look at your caseload early in the morning and go, oh, I've got Mrs. Johnson and Mr. Jones. They're both Parkinson's patients. I need to go see them early. And maybe you've got somebody that's got the flu. Put them off to later in the afternoon. You have to kind of manage your caseload with all of these patients. The neurological patients are going to do better in the morning, kind of wean towards the end of the day. MS, same thing. They're going to be tired towards the end of the day. You're going to get a lot more refusals. And you're going to find that refusals aren't good. The more refusal you get, the less hours you may get, especially if you're PRN. The less refusals you get, the more hours you'll get. So don't let something like that cause you where you go to see, you're like, oh, I've got a Parkinson's patient. I'll see them at 5 o'clock at night. And by then the patient's wasted and you got to see them. They're like, no. Right? Same thing if you're planning, if your clinic plans Parkinson's classes, you should plan them in the morning. A lot of clinics will run specific Parkinson's classes over lunch. And they're not billing them as PT treatments. They're just Parkinson's exercise classes. So 20 or 30 Parkinson's patients come in and they all work together. There's something to be said about being in a clinic with people that have similar problems. Hold on here. I just saw a chat come up in it. There it goes. Normally I see I get frustrated whenever she gets denied by a patient. Yeah, exactly. So Irene's like, no wonder my CI gets frustrated whenever we get denied by a patient. Because that can affect things. That affects your productivity, number one. And your productivity can affect your raises and how many hours you get. In the outpatient world, sometimes if your patients cancel appointments, they may send you home for that hour. One of the clinics I worked at before, I came back from lunch and 3 patients in a row canceled. So boom, boom, boom. So 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. They made me clock out for those 3 hours. And then I had to come back at 4 o'clock. Then I had a 4, 5, and 6. So that can happen. Refusals are bad. It's bad for the patient, really, right? And it's kind of funny because what's the reason most patients are going to cancel? Does anyone know? Well, lazy. Okay, you got that too. Believe it or not, that's not as large of a reason. Here's the deal. If they're lazy, they're going to cancel no matter what, right? Yeah, they can't get their pain, right? Pain's a lot of the reasons cancellations happen, which is ironic because that's why they're in PT. Sometimes we're reminding patients that going, hey, I know you're in pain. Come in. Let me see if I can help you with it. Wouldn't you rather be out of pain than not? And those are the times you have to kind of dial back your exercise load, right? Don't totally freak them out. Yet, personal injury is a little different, Jaira. You're exactly right. Were you at Lions Physical Therapy? Yeah. Personal injury is a little different. It's its own beast. I could go into that for a whole while. Personal injury is its own world. John Lyons is he's fantastic. He's one of our advisory board members. I like him a lot too. He's hired a lot of our students. But yeah, so most of the time, honestly, the patients, 2 reasons they cancel: fatigue and tired, or fatigue and tired, fatigue and pain, right? Hemiparesis, right? Hemiparesis can cause, there's all kinds, but the thing is, that's why you're here, right? Parkinson's patients, I'm too tired to come in. Well, the reason they're tired is because they're not moving, right? They're not getting up and getting large amplitude movements. They're getting all those baby movements. So getting up and getting that large amplitude movements can sometimes relieve some of that fatigue. So this is why, getting these patients scheduled properly is important. Unfortunately, and I hate to say this, but the people at the front desk don't often understand that, do they? For those that worked outpatient. All they look at is go, there's a hole right there. Plug. Right? And your best clinics are when the schedulers actually understand the patient's conditions and can manage and go, okay, so I need all my Parkinson's patients in early in the morning, right? And one of the clinics I had did that. They scheduled all Parkinson's, MS, Myasthenia Gravis patients were all early, not Myasthenia Gravis, ALS were all early in the morning. And then the afternoon was all ortho. That makes sense, right? Strokes early in the morning because they're going to be fatigued by the time you get to the afternoon. So you guys have got to be thinking about that if you're going, especially in a hospital setting, because that's going to be where you have more of a control over your schedule. Now, if you're in a hospital setting where you have to see ortho patients twice a day, don't have much control over that. Get the ortho patients out of the way and get to your neuros, right? But if you're in the, you've got 15 patients and 10 of them are, just gen med patients that are sick or something like that. And then you've got patients that are Parkinson's, stroke, blah, blah, blah. Go see those neuro patients first. Get them out of your way. They're also usually your hardest patients, meaning require the most energy and most attention on your part. So that's why if you have like a stroke and you see them at 5 o'clock, you're likely to have falls because by that time your brain's fried, right? So you got to think about scheduling your patients. Speaking of brain fried, how's everyone feeling? We're going to talk about a Parkinson's patient now here real quick. Let me bring this up. I've got a patient scenario here just for this. Let me find it. Honestly, it's patient 3. And all these patient scenarios we made available today for you guys to kind of look at. So we're going to talk through some of them. We're going to spend about 20 minutes talking through this. There we go. Let me bring this up. So I'm going to bring this over here. And we're going to go Zoom meeting and share screen. All right, and I bring my chat back up here so I can see it. All right, so I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so that you guys can see a little bit better. No, I don't want to do that. I just want to bring it bigger. All right, can everyone see the document? So I got it back up. Okay, so we have Francisco Ramon here. He likes to go by Cisco. He's a 73-year-old male with advanced Parkinson's. He's now in a SNF for functional training. Okay, possible long-term placement. So his active concerns right now, he's got heavy incidence of resting tremor in both of his upper extremities with moderate postural tremor of the head. So he's got some pretty bad resting tremor in both of his arms, and he's got a little bit of a tic probably going on with his head. Reduced gait functionality, generalized weakness. He's a high fall risk with a high history of falls. And he's got poor compliance with meds. Almost always, you're going to see that on a chart. Patient has poor compliance with meds. No one wants to take their meds. Just the way it is. They don't want to take them, right? Even you guys, think about it. When you have meds, you don't want to take them. So we know, and when you're looking at the chart, those active concerns are the things we're looking at. What's causing them to be here today? PMH means what? What does PMH mean? Past medical history. Thank you. Good, Sakana. So he's past medical history here. He's got several previous incidents of falls. So we know, if nothing else, what are we going to have to use with this patient? Gait belts. Good. He's got HTN, CHF, and DM2. HTN means he's got what? Hypertension. Good. Congestive heart failure. And then DM2, he's got, as Wilford Brimley would say, he's got diabetes. All right. So knowing that, so looking at those three conditions, what else are you going to want to get on this patient as soon as you go see him? Yeah, vitals. Vitals are going to be key. Vitals are going to be vital to this patient, right? You're going to monitor the vitals the whole treatment. Blood sugar, are you going to check that for the patient? No, but who could you check with? Nursing, right? Or just look at this chart. It'll usually say, or check with him, right? When was your last blood sugar taken? Oh, it was 320 minutes ago. What? Right? So you don't have to test it. You may get him his kit. If he wants to check his blood sugar before therapy, sure, hand him his kit. Maybe he can't reach it, right? So social history, this kind of tells us about our patient here. So the patient resides currently at home, alone, in an ALF. So he eats cats. I'm just kidding. No one remembers ALF? ALF was great. ALF is an assisted living facility, right? Single floor apartment complex. Patient was previously a professor of physics at a local industry and is now retired. Okay, knowing that, what does that tell you? So you see how I'm starting to get little nuggets as we go down. Yeah, he's smart. He's got his, cognitively, at least he was there, right? Patient has no nearby living relatives, friends, or family, and usually spends his day in his study reading books. So is that a safety concern for him going home? Yeah, so we got some safety concerns. All right, so looking at, this is the PT eval. They noted that he has lead pipe rigidity in both his upper extremities, right? So that means getting active movement, he's locked up. That means he's using a lot of energy. Key thing here, he has no pain. Woo-hoo, finally a patient with no pain. Right? And if you look, range of motion, he's got gross within functional limits. So are we so worried about his range of motion? No, because he's pretty functional. Right? But the problem is he's got that rigidity that's restricting him from it. So relaxation is going to be key. What about his strength? His strength look okay? What do you think about his strength? Yeah, strength is okay. We know it's pretty okay. There's a good way to put it in. We know he's got anti-gravity. At least we know that. He may not be, super, buff like the Hulk, but he's got some strength there. So overall, looking at this patient, we're like, okay, this is not horrible. He's got some strength. He's got range of motion. Okay. Now we're going to look at his transfers and bed mobility. Bed mobility in supine requires min assist occasionally mod assist for sheet location. So sometimes he slides around in his bed. He might need a little help moving up in bed. That's most old people, right? Especially if they're in a hospital bed, because they like to put that back of that bed up and then they slide all the way down to the foot of the bed. And then they don't think about, oh, if I put the bed down, I can get back up in bed. So then they struggle for 40 minutes and they're trying to get themselves back uphill. right? Has anyone ever seen, did any of you see that in the hospital? Like where you have little old Millie and you put her in bed fine and you go by like 30 minutes later and she's like all curled up in fetal position at the bottom of the bed because she slid all the way down there, right? That happens. So he needs a little bit of help. I mean, min assist, not bad. Mod assist probably when he gets tired, right? Supine to sit, min A, with heavy verbal cueing. What do you think we need to give him verbal cueing for? Elevate feet works well. Exactly, Kaylee. What do you think's happening when he's trying to move? He locks up. Exactly. Right? So he's locking up. So we need to give that verbal cueing or some tactile cueing. Come on. Come on. Right? Work with him a little bit. Overall, not bad, right? Function, seated edge of the bed requires mod assist for neutral midline, right? So static seated edge of bed, that means he's sitting at the edge of the bed with no movement. He's a mod assist. Are we ever going to leave this patient alone at the edge of the bed? No, right? So here's the thing. When you are looking at your patient's chart, if they are anything other than mod I, you should not leave the patient alone at the edge of the bed. If they're even supervision, don't leave them alone sitting at the edge of the bed, because that is just a recipe for a fall. So dynamic seated edge of bed requires mod assist as well. So what kind of stuff could he be doing that has movement sitting at the edge of the bed? What could he be doing? So I'm now sitting at the edge of the bed and you're working with me. What about ADLs? Could that be considered dynamic edge of bed sitting activities? Yeah, like so you bring over the toothpaste pan or the spit platoon and some toothpaste and I'm sitting there brushing my teeth. When I'm brushing my teeth, I'm moving. It's not like I sit here like, even that's movement. So I've got movement going on at that point. So he's mod assist for that. So if you don't guard him, he's going to be all over the place, right? So again, main thing, this patient, do not leave him at the edge of the bed. If you have to go get something, what should you do? Say you have to go get a piece of equipment. Lay him back down. Yeah, I don't even think get help, honestly, Dylan, unless it's another PT or PTA, or maybe OT's in with them. Lay him back down or put him up in a Jerry chair. Right? And Jerry chair is that chair that they really can't fall out of. We'll talk about that. All right, his ambulation. Sit to stands mod assist due to lack of quad initiation. How are we going to get his quads to fire? What kind of techniques can we use? So I'm trying to stand up, but this is kind of what he's going to look like. Because his quads aren't firing to extend his knees. What kind of things could we maybe do to the quads? Could you Russian? Okay, yeah, we could. Absolutely. Especially if we have a targeted Russian where, we've got, because there are some Russians that you can press a button and it causes them to fire. Absolutely, we could do that. Can also do tapping. A tapping like this, yeah, tactile cueing. A tapping like that on those quads, what it does is it gives him a cue that they need to fire. So tapping the whole way through, right? So I've got one hand on the gate belt. I'm kind of tap and tap, 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 tap. Let's stand up, right? Trying to get him to stand up. Alternatively, you may play some ludicrous because some of the beats of ludicrous are good for getting the patient to move. Exactly. Stand up. See, you know where I was going with that. So, he's rough. So you get me up, right? I'm up. I'm able to stand up here statically for about 5 minutes or greater than 5 minutes, right? but I fatigue. And I'm in assist when I'm standing up. So I may be a little bit off, a little bit off kilter when I'm standing. Dynamic standing requires mod assist and can't perform for much more than 30 seconds. So anything involving reaching, moving, anything like that in standing, whoo-wee, I'm a rough. Right? So now, are we going to walk this patient without an assistive device? No. That's a recipe for disaster. Right? And Dr. Reskin made you the soap note recipe. Well, that would be a different type of recipe. That's going to be a recipe for a fall. All right, before we go any further, I'm scrolling into this because I've got this and you guys don't. What assistive device do we want to use? What if it's your first time treating him ever? Okay, Erica says parallel bars. Good. It's a great example, right? Stand him up, transfer him over to a wheelchair, get him in the wheelchair and take him down to the parallel bars. It's a perfect example. Now we're in a hospital, we don't have parallel bars. Okay, we could use front-wheeled walker. I'd be a little worried about that at first, especially with just standing. I may just get a what type of walker? Standard, right? And it depends. I mean, this is going to be one of those, how comfortable am I treating a neuro patient? And what are my goals? If my goals are for movement and ambulation, the front-wheeled walker is the better choice, because the front-wheeled walker promotes more of a standardized gait pattern. If I'm just doing activities at the edge of the bed, like doing some exercises, maybe some mini squats, some arm reaches, stuff like that, I'm going to use a standard walker. Does that make sense, the differentiation there between those two? Right? Because one, I'm just kind of not moving. The other, I'm walking through the hospital. So that's why a lot of times when I go into the hospital, one of the things I do in the rehab department is I go grab a wheelchair and I load the wheelchair up with all my equipment I might need walking through the hospital. So I'll have a standard walker, I'll have a rolling walker, I'll have a cane, I'll have a set of crutches, have a pulse oximeter, blood pressure cuff, stethoscope, and it's all in my little chair. Because that way I can roll it all the way through the hospital, and then if I need a wheelchair, I have a wheelchair. Right? So I've got everything I need to treat a patient. I don't have to ever go, hold on here, Mr. Ramon, I've got to go get a cane. Right? And then maybe a cuff weight or two. All right, so we know that dynamic activity is going to be rough, right? All right, let's look at gait here. Patient's able to ambulate 100 foot by 1 with front-wheeled walker. That's pretty good, isn't it? I mean, it's not shabby. Okay, he does have ataxic and bradykinetic movements. So ataxic meaning he's having trouble moving those feet forward, right? That the motor plan is there, but the implementation's off. And bradykinetic are very slow. Now, he's probably got festination of gait, right? So here he is. He's walking. He gets to that edge of a door, and now he goes from a blue floor to an orange floor. He freezes because it's a change or transition. How are you going to get him to unfreeze? So here I am. I'm frozen. What are some ideas? I'm stuck. Okay, verbal cues. I'm like, I am moving. I am. Come on, Kelly. I'm trying. Don't you see I'm moving? I'm going forward. Okay, you could maybe give me a little bit of push. Just watch if I have anterior propulsion, right? Because that could be bad. Could you give me a target? There you go, right? So now you're sitting beside me, right? And you're like, okay, move that left foot up to my left foot. Yeah, walk to the drinking fountain. Now he stops staring at the floor, stares at the drinking fountain. Now he's not paying attention to the transition. You could do something like clicking, click, 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 to give him something to overcome that visual problem. Metronome would work well, yep. But even sometimes with that, they'll freeze at those transitions. So that's where I may make a game. I've done it before where if I've got a patient in the hospital for a long period of time or a sniff, I make a little footprint with tape outside their door. Because I know they're going to freeze at that doorway. So we get to that doorway, he starts freezing, step on that footprint. It gives them a target, they go by it, and they unfreeze. Something as simple as that is just amazing. Getting rid of that stuff at their home would be a big deal. So here's his goal, a Berg balance scale of 38. We're going to talk about Berg balance in a little bit here with vestibular. But here's the deal with Berg balance. The lower the score, the worse he is. Did anyone deal with Berg while they were on their clinicals? Anyone ever encounter somebody with a Berg balance score? Saw one? Yeah. Berg balance score of 38 pretty much says this patient falls all the time. That should be a red flag to you, right? This may be a patient that I may want somebody to follow me with a wheelchair so that if he gets too tired, he can sit down. Or I may pull a wheelchair behind us. So this is his goals. He wants to go back to the library and museum. He wants to stay in the ALF instead of going to a sniff. And he wants to do stuff like helping himself get out of bed. He wants to do stuff easier. He wants to do it for himself. Already in your head, which one of those goals is probably out of the path already? Go ahead, it's fine. Okay, probably going to the museum. Maybe if he's got help. But going back to the ALF is probably another one. Yeah, this patient's probably sniff bound. Okay? So if he's sniff bound, that's just the way it is. And our job at that point is to convince him it's not a death sentence. Because a lot of people think going to a nursing home is sending them there to die. They're not all that way. Some are. They're not all that way. All right, so we know all of this stuff. These are the goals PT has given us, right? So this is kind of looking at what an eval, and I only did short-term goals on these. Then we got our CPT codes. What does this tell us down here? What do these CPT codes tell us? Do you guys know what CPT codes are? Yeah, what to work with the patient. This tells us what we're allowed to do. Right? So these are all the codes of the different billing we can do. Right? So we've got 9711, which is our common one, which is TheraX. We've got manual therapy. We've got therapeutic activities. We got some modalities there. So these CPT codes tell us what we're allowed to do with the patient. They're going to be set by the PT. So if you have a CPT, if you look at your authorized CPT code and you don't have modalities, can I do ultrasound with him? No, I can't even do an ice pack. Right? So maybe let's say you're working with Ramon here or Cisco and you're like, man, you know what? A hot pack on his back before I get him up would probably help him with some of his mobility. You're like thinking in your head, that would really kind of make, maybe stop by 20 minutes before you're ready to treat him, set him on a hot pack, and then come treat him. You're thinking, that's going to work out well. What do we need to do as PTAs? Yeah, go to the PT. Say, hey, I have this idea. Check the code first of all. If it's there, great, go with it. If not, you go, man. So I'll hike my butt down to Dr. Ovreskin after my treatment and say, hey, I was working with Cisco today. He had a lot of tightness in his low back with that rigidity he had. I think it'd be really good to try some hot pack maybe before getting him out of bed. What do you think about that? More than likely, your PT is going to be like, yeah, whatever. Hey, can you add that CPT code for me? And they'll go in and they'll say, okay, let me know when you have your note done, because they can't edit CPT codes until somebody's done a note for the day. So you type in your note, you put your note in. Now, if Dr. Ovreskin was my PT, she could go in and add an addendum. And it would say something like, after consulting with PTA after treatment, added modalities to patient's treatment codes. That's all she needs to do. Now we can do it. So the next visit, now I can do a hot pack with him, right? If I don't have the ADL CPT code, technically I cannot do ADLs with him. And some hospitals do not allow PTs and PTAs to do ADLs. It's an OT only skill. So pay attention to that. That's what your CPT codes are going to tell you. One of these is gait. I want to say it's 97116, but don't quote me off the top of my head right now. If I do not have a gait CPT code, what can I not do with this patient? I can't do what? Can't walk the patient. Yeah, I can't do any gait training at all. Right? Let's say that we went up here and when the PT saw him, he was too tired and fatigued and he just came in after a fall and the PT was not able to do the gait assessment. But now you go see him and man, he's like ready and raring. He's up, he's like, let's go for a walk. And he gets to the edge of the bed and he's like, okay, I got up, and you transfer him over to the chair. And he's like, let's go for a walk. I want to go for a walk. Can you walk him? No. Now, what you can do is go get a PT and have them walk with you. The PT that eval'd him, like I could go get Dr. Reskin and say, hey, hold on, Cisco, let me put you in the chair here, get your legs up, relax for a second. I'm gonna go get Dr. Reskin here real quick and say, hey, Cisco's ready for a walk. That sounds really bad. Cisco's ready for, good boy, ready for a walk, right? And she'll be like, okay, cool, I'll be right there. She can come down and she can observe you walking with him. You can be the one doing the gait as long as she is the one assessing the gait. Does that make sense? So what I would do at that point in my SOAP note is I would put on my objective, I'd say, see PT addendum for gait today. Does that make sense? Because then the PT is going to document on the addendum what they did with gait, and that can authorize you for gait, and that can change their eval. These are a little bit of the rules we work with this. But if the PT has not assessed them for a specific thing, we can't do it. All right, just a couple more things and I'll let you go. This patient already has given us a lot of social history. We know he likes to go to the library. We know he likes to go to the museums. What kind of stuff can you work into, like what kind of stuff, stuff's not the term I want to use. What kind of items can you work into his therapy that would help be functional for him? Meaning would encourage him to actually participate in his therapy. You know he likes to read. You know he likes to go to museums. You know he likes to go to libraries. What would be books? There we go. Perfect. Get some books. Bring books with you. Instead of using weights and dumbbells, use books. Because that's what he likes. Encyclopedias are great. When I'm doing standing balance, have him reading a book. When I'm doing seated balance, have him flipping pages of the book or moving the books on a bookshelf. Do you see how working that little bit of personal history in can get buy-in from the patient? Right? You know, like if I had Kelly, you know, I'd get some bungee cords and have her doing bungee cord jumping out of, no, I'm just joking. We're not going to do that. Right? But let's say Kelly was one of my patients. I know she has a kid. Guess what? That kid's going to become part of my therapy. Because I'm going to use them to help encourage her. I'm not going to have the kid. Oh, yeah, right. He would love it, right? He'd be fantastic. Grandkids are fantastic. I mean, this guy doesn't have any family, right? That's the problem. Museums. I have done things where I've done virtual tours in museums. VR is great for this now. Where we could be walking, and when he's walking in his goggles, he's actually seeing the museum, he's walking around, he's looking around, doing dynamic stuff in VR. As long as you clear the room out, of course, right? But you see how just getting that little bit can get buy-in from the patient? That's what's really cool about neuro to me, is that you don't necessarily always have to use your standard equipment. I've used books. I had a patient, one of the patients we're going to talk about in a little bit does knitting. I've sat and knit with the patient for 45 minutes in different positions. And she loved it because it was what she wanted to do. Whereas somebody else came in and just did generic exercise with them and she hated the therapy. Right? You have somebody that plays football. Guess what you're going to do with them? Play a little bit of football with them. Throw a ball. Maybe give them a reward that if they participate in therapy, you will throw the ball back and forth with them for a little bit. I've integrated therapy dogs into my treatment because for some reason, people love dogs. I don't understand it. I don't like dogs, but. Any questions? So Jared said he's tutored a patient with Parkinson's and I wanted to play guitar. Exactly, right? And that just, if they want to do it, use it. Yeah, with that, there's two things. Then you got the tones and you get the fine motor skills, right? I think that's how guitar is played. I don't know. And stop.